The ink on the contract was still wet. A dark blue signature that marked the end of Evan Hale's life as a senior structural engineer and the beginning of his life as a recluse. The realtor, a nervous man named Arthur who smelled vaguely of spearmint and desperation, tapped his fingers on the hood of his sedan. The air in the valley was thick, smelling of cedar and wet earth, a stark contrast to the recycled oxygen and ozone of the city Evan had left 3 hours ago. "Congratulations," Arthur said, though the word sounded more like a question. "It is a unique property, truly unique. The price was, well, frankly a steal." Evan looked up from the paperwork. He was 34 years old but felt 50. His eyes carried the gray weight of too many 70-hour work weeks and too many projects where profit margins had been prioritized over safety standards. He had burned out hard, and the ash of that burnout had settled in his chest, making it difficult to breathe around people. "It was cheap," Evan said, his voice scratching from disuse. "Why was it cheap, Arthur?" Arthur laughed, a brittle sound that cracked in the quiet valley air. "Fixer-upper," Arthur said, waving a hand toward the house. "It is a fixer-upper with history. The previous owner was a bit eccentric. Disappeared about 5 years ago, just walked off one day. Left everything. The bank sat on it. Legal battles. You know how it is. But the structure? Solid bones." Evan looked at the house. It sat deep in the lot, shadowed by towering pines and ancient oaks. It was a 2-story craftsman that had seen better decades, the paint peeling in long, sunburnt strips like dead skin. But the porch was wide, the roofline was straight, and behind it, the river moved. He could hear the river from here. It did not sound like water rushing over rocks. It sounded smoother, heavier. It sounded like moving glass. "I do not care about the history," Evan said, handing the clipboard back. "As long as nobody knocks on my door." Arthur took the papers, visibly relieved to have the liability off his ledger. "About that," Arthur said. He hesitated, glancing toward the side of the house where a bulkhead door led to the basement. The inspector mentioned the basement door is sealed. Some kind of old hazard tape. Probably just old utility tunnels. This valley is full of them. Old mining shafts, drainage, Cold War bunkers. I would not poke around down there if I were you. Best to leave sleeping dogs lie." Evan nodded. He had no intention of digging. He just wanted to sit on the porch, drink coffee that did not taste like office break room sludge, and forget that the rest of the human race existed. "I will take the keys now," Evan said. Arthur handed them over. They were cold and heavy brass. "Enjoy the quiet, Mr. Hale," Arthur said. He got into his car and drove away faster than the gravel driveway strictly allowed, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the quiet air. Evan stood alone. The silence of the valley descended on him, heavy and absolute. He took a deep breath, tasting the pine resin and the damp river mud. He walked up the creaking steps to the porch. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air in the house was stale, a time capsule of dust motes dancing in the shafts of light cutting through the grime on the windows. Furniture sat under white sheets like ghosts waiting for orders. He spent the first 3 hours unloading his truck. He had not brought much. A box of clothes, a box of books, a high-end toolkit that was worth more than the truck itself, and enough canned food to last a month. He moved with the mechanical efficiency of an engineer, optimizing his path from the truck to the kitchen, minimizing wasted movement. It was a habit he could not break. When the sun began to dip below the ridgeline, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, Evan went outside to inspect the perimeter. He needed to know his boundaries. He walked the side of the house. The grass was waist-high here, wild and unchecked. He found the basement door Arthur had mentioned. It was a slanted steel bulkhead, rusted to the color of dried blood. Arthur had been right about the tape. Strips of heavy-duty yellow and black vinyl were plastered across the seam where the doors met. It was not standard police tape. It looked industrial, thicker, with symbols repeating on the yellow stripes that Evan did not recognize. They looked like triangles intersecting with circles, but the geometry was slightly off, hurting the eyes if he stared too long. Outdated hazard tape, he muttered to himself. He reached out and touched the steel. It was cold, not cool, but cold, as if there were a block of ice pressing against it from the inside. He pulled his hand back. He had promised himself he would not get involved in projects. If the basement was sealed, it stayed sealed. He had enough to fix upstairs. Evan walked to the back of the property. The land sloped gently down toward the river. The trees grew thicker here, their roots gnarled and exposed like the knuckles of old men. The sound of the river grew louder, that strange, smooth rushing noise. He stopped at the edge of the water. It was a wide river fed by the mountain runoff, clear and deep. In the twilight, the surface looked like oil, reflecting the darkening sky without distortion. It was beautiful. It was lonely. It was exactly what he had paid for. Evan sat on a large, flat rock near the water's edge and watched the light die. For the first time in 10 years, his phone was off. No emails, no frantic calls from project managers, no collapse risk assessments. He closed his eyes and listened. And then, he heard it, laughter. It drifted from further down the river bend, carried on the cool breeze. It was faint, but distinct. Evan frowned. He opened his eyes. Arthur had said the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. He listened again. The laughter came again. It was high, melodic, and strange. It did not sound like the raucous laughter of teenagers drinking beer in the woods. It sounded harmonized, almost like a chord being struck on a glass instrument. It rose and fell with a rhythm that matched the river. Evan stood up, his engineer's brain instantly categorizing and analyzing. Distance, maybe 200 yards. Source, human vocal cords, female. Number of sources, at least 2, possibly 3. He felt a flash of irritation. If kids were using his property as a party spot, he would have to put up a fence. He was not going to be the grumpy old man chasing kids off his lawn. But he was also not going to have his solitude broken by musical giggling. He waited, listening for the splash of oars or the crack of a beer can. But there was only the river and that faint, drifting music of laughter. It stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Evan waited 10 minutes, standing in the deepening dark. But the silence returned, thick and unbroken. He turned and walked back to the house, the hair on his arm standing up. He told himself it was just the acoustics of the valley, sound carrying over the water from miles away. He went inside, locked the door, and ate a cold dinner of beans out of the can. He slept on a mattress on the floor, and for the first time in years, he did not dream of buildings collapsing. The next morning, the sun hit the valley floor with a brilliance that burned the mist off the river by 8 o'clock. Evan drank his coffee on the porch, watching a hawk circle a thermal updraft. He felt better. The irritation of the previous night had faded with the darkness. He decided to map the property lines properly. He needed to know exactly where his land ended and the state forest began. He grabbed the folded survey map Arthur had given him, a compass and a roll of orange marker tape. He started at the north corner, finding the old iron pin driven into the earth beneath a fern. He moved methodically, tying orange ribbons to trees every 50 feet. It was calming work. Measure, check, tie. Measure, check, tie. The line took him deeper into the woods, toward the river bend where the property curved. The undergrowth was dense here, tall reeds and thorny blackberry bushes that snagged his jeans. He checked the map. His property line extended right to the center of the river channel. He owned the bank and the shallow water. He pushed through a thick wall of reeds, the stalks rattling against his jacket. The air was warmer here, humid and smelling of blooming jasmine, which was impossible for this latitude. Evan stepped through the final barrier of greenery and froze. He was standing on a small, secluded beach of white sand, hidden from the main house by the curve of the land and the density of the trees. The river widened here into a calm, crystal-clear pool, sheltered by weeping willows that trailed their branches in the water. And in the water, 3 women were bathing. Evan's brain simply stopped. It was a complete cessation of cognitive function. They were not wearing swimsuits. They were not wearing anything. They stood in waist-deep water, their backs mostly to him, scrubbing their arms with smooth gray stones. But it was not their nudity that froze Evan's lungs. It was their skin. It was pale, almost translucent, like moonlight caught in alabaster. And beneath the surface of that skin, faint, luminous patterns pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. The patterns looked like constellations, swirling spirals of soft bioluminescence that glowed violet and teal against their pale flesh. Their hair was wet, slicked back, but it floated on the water's surface with impossible buoyancy, spreading out like pools of spilled ink that refused to mix with the river. One of them turned slightly, presenting a profile that was human, yet terrifyingly perfect. High cheekbones that looked sharp enough to cut glass, ears that tapered to a subtle, elegant point, and a neck that was slightly too long to be anatomically standard. Evan stood there, the map crutched in one hand, the roll of orange tape in the other. He was an intruder in a painting. He was a man witnessing a mythology he did not believe in. The engineer in him tried to rationalize it. Cosplay, elaborate body paint, LED implants, some kind of avant-garde photo shoot. But the light under their skin moved. It flowed like blood. The absurdity of the situation collided with the reality of his purchase. He looked at the map in his hand, then at the women, then back at the map. The words tumbled out of his mouth before he could stop them, loud and clumsy in the sacred quiet of the clearing. I just bought this house. Why are my 3 neighbors bathing in my river? The reaction was instantaneous. The 3 women spun toward him with startled grace, moving faster than water resistance should have allowed. As they turned, the river around them seemed to brighten. For half a second, the water itself glowed with a sympathetic resonance, amplifying the light in their skin until the pool was a blinding flash of turquoise. Evan flinched, throwing a hand up to shield his eyes. "Oh God, I am sorry," he yelled, panic finally overriding his shock. He turned to flee, his boots scrabbling for purchase on the smooth river stones, his toe caught on a piece of driftwood. The physics of the moment were undeniable. Momentum carried him forward while his feet stayed behind. Evan windmilled his arms, the map flying into the reeds, the orange tape unspooling in a festive arc through the air. He hit the sand face first with a thud that knocked the wind out of him. He lay there for a second, groaning, tasting sand and humiliation. Silence returned to the clearing. Slowly, painfully. Evan pushed himself up to his knees. He kept his eyes squeezed shut. "I am leaving," he wheezed, pointing a finger vaguely back toward the woods. "I am walking away. I did not see anything. I am just going to crawl back to my house and sell it." Do new owners always announce themselves to water spirits? The voice was cool, accented with a cadence Evan had never heard before. It sounded like someone speaking English after learning it from reading poetry. precise and rhythmic. Evan opened one eye. The woman who had spoken was standing closer now, though still in the water. The water level covered her to the collarbone. She was the one he had seen in profile. Her eyes were wide and dark, the irises a swirling storm of indigo. She was calm, terrifyingly calm. The other two were behind her. One peered over the leader's shoulder, eyes wide with unbridled curiosity. The third was further back. Her body tensed, eyes scanning the tree line behind Evan as if expecting an ambush. Evan realized he was staring. He also realized he was wearing a heavy flannel jacket and they were naked in a river. He scrambled to unzip his jacket, his fingers fumbling. "Here," he said, struggling out of the sleeves. He held the jacket out like a shield, keeping his eyes fixed strictly on the leader's face. "Please, take it. I am not looking." The leader waded closer. She moved through the water without making a ripple. She reached out and took the jacket. Her fingers brushed his hand. Her skin was cool, and a tiny static shock, like touching a doorknob in winter. Zipped up Evan's arm. She pulled the jacket on. It was 3 sizes too big, engulfing her, but she wore it with the dignity of a queen wearing a coronation robe. She buttoned it swiftly. "Thank you," she said. A small smile touched her lips, but it did not reach her eyes. Her eyes remained calculating, assessing him. It felt like a test. "I am Sira," she said. Evan stood up, dusting wet sand off his jeans. "I am Evan Hale." Sira gestured to the woman behind her, the one with the curious eyes and hair that seemed to defy gravity even more than the others. "This is Nemi," Sira said. Nemi waved. She had a mischievous energy, vibrating with a surplus of adrenaline. "You fell down," Nemi said. Her voice was lighter, bell-like. It was very loud. "Do humans always fall down when they see water?" "Only the clumsy ones," Evan muttered. "And Vael," Sira said, gesturing to the third woman. Vael did not wave. She stood waist-deep, arms crossed over her chest, watching Evan with the intensity of a sniper. She gave a sharp, single nod, then returned her gaze to the forest canopy. Evan looked at them. The initial shock was fading, replaced by the engineer's analytical focus. They were not just naked aliens. They were not panicked. They were not screaming or covering themselves in shame. They were organized. Vael was watching the perimeter. Sira was handling the diplomacy. Nemi was the observer. They moved like a unit, like a squad. Evan took a step back, raising his hands to show they were empty. "Look," he said. "I do not know what is going on. I do not know what you are." The realtor said this place had history, but he did not mention bioluminescent neighbors. Sira's expression hardened. The faint smile vanished. "You saw the light?" she asked. Evan pointed to his own shoulder. "Under your skin. It glows." Sira exchanged a glance with Vael. Vael shifted in the water, her muscles tensing. "Mr. Hale," Sira said, her voice dropping an octave. It acquired a steel edge, polite but heavy with implied consequences. "What you saw today is a private matter. We value our privacy above all things." Evan looked at Vael, who looked ready to snap his neck if he gave the wrong answer. He thought about the city. He thought about the endless meetings, the corporate lies, the noise. He had come here to get away from complexity. And now, complexity was standing in his river wearing his flannel jacket. He also felt a strange, inexplicable pull. The world had just cracked open. The laws of physics had just winked at him. He wanted to run, but he also wanted to know how. "I can keep a secret," Evan said. "I moved here to be left alone. I assume you want the same." Sira studied him. Her gaze felt physical, like she was scanning his heart rate. "We do," she said. "Then I never saw you," Evan said. He picked up his roll of orange tape. "I will finish my mapping on the other side of the hill." Sierra nodded slowly. That would be wise. Evan turned and walked back toward the reeds. He forced himself not to run. He forced himself to walk with a casual stride, like a man who had not just met 3 extraterrestrial beings in his backyard. When he reached the tree line, he looked back. The river was empty. The surface was smooth as glass. There were no ripples. It was as if they had dissolved into the water. Evan spent the rest of the day in a fugue state. He fixed the porch railing. He unpacked his books. He made a sandwich and stared at it for 20 minutes before eating it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the patterns on their skin. Luminous spirals, violet and teal. He walked out to the fence line in the late afternoon to check the perimeter again. He needed to ground himself in reality. Wood, wire, dirt. He stopped at a cedar fence post near the back of the garden. There was a fresh scratch on the wood. It was not a random animal scratch. It was carved with precision, deep into the grain. It was a symbol, a circle with 3 intersecting lines, curved like waves. Evan felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. He recognized the geometry. It was the same style of curve he had seen glowing on Sierra's shoulder. He touched the wood. No sap had formed yet. It was minutes old. They had been here. They had marked the perimeter. Evan went back inside and locked the door. He checked the window latches. He checked them twice. Night fell heavy and black. The valley had no streetlights to dilute the darkness. Evan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Around 2 in the morning, the sound started. It was not the laughter this time. It was a thrum. It was a low, vibrational frequency that he felt in his teeth before he heard it with his ears. It came from the direction of the river, but it traveled through the bedrock. The window glass in his bedroom rattled in its frame. It sounded like a massive generator spinning up deep underground. Evan sat up. The thrumming grew louder, then pitched down into a sub-bass rumble that made the floorboards tremble. He eventually drifted into a restless, shallow sleep. He dreamed he was underwater. He was breathing the river and the water tasted like ozone. In the dream, he swam down toward the bottom of the riverbed. There was a door there, a door made of black stone. It was opening, grinding against the silt. Light spilled out of the crack, blinding, violet light. Evan woke up with a gasp. The sun was up. The thrumming was gone. He swung his legs out of bed and walked into the kitchen to get water. He stopped in the doorway. There were footprints on the linoleum floor. They were damp, dark shapes against the faded white tile. They were bare footprints, long, narrow. The arch was too high. The toes were slightly too long. They were already drying, the edges turning to faint outlines of river mud. Evan's heart hammered against his ribs and he followed the trail. The prints led from the back door, which was still locked, across the kitchen, and stopped at the basement door. Evan stared at the basement door. The yellow and black hazard tape, the outdated tape he had seen yesterday, had been cut. It was a clean slice, straight through the vinyl, right at the seam of the door. The adhesive was still tacky. Someone had gone down there, or someone had come up. Evan backed away. He grabbed a heavy iron crowbar from his toolkit on the counter. It felt ridiculous in his hand, a primitive club against whatever this was. He heard a creak from the front porch, a floorboard settling under weight. Evan moved to the front window and peered through the blinds. Sierra was standing at the edge of his yard, right where the grass met the gravel driveway. She was wearing his flannel jacket, buttoned to the chin, and a pair of dark pants that looked like they had been fashioned out of some matte, synthetic material. She was barefoot. She was looking directly at the window, directly at him. She did not look angry. She looked like she was waiting for a bus. Evan unlocked the front door. He kept the crowbar hidden behind the doorframe, leaning against the wall. He stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was cold. "Good morning," Sira said. She did not raise her voice, but it carried perfectly. "You were in my house," Evan said. It was not a question. Sira tilted her head. "We checked the perimeter. It was necessary." "Necessary for what?" Evan asked. Sira walked forward, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked up at him. Her eyes were impossibly dark in the daylight, absorbing the sun rather than reflecting it. "We have a proposal, Evan," she said. Evan crossed his arms. "I am listening. You pretend we do not exist. We pretend you do not exist. You stay on your side of the tree line. We stay on ours. You do not ask questions about the lights, or the river, or the unique biology of your neighbors." "And in exchange?" Evan asked. "In exchange, we remain good neighbors," Sira said. "We ensure your property remains quiet. We ensure you remain safe." "Safe from what?" Evan asked. Sira paused. "Safe from the complications that follow us." Evan looked at her. He saw the tension in her jaw. He saw the way she held her hands, loose but ready to strike. She was terrified, buried deep under the layer of operative calm. She was absolutely terrified. "Are you hiding from someone?" Evan asked. The question slipped out. The engineer needed to know the root cause of the stress. Sira's expression tightened. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a haunted, desperate exhaustion. "We are hiding from everyone," she said. The wind rustled the cedar trees. Sira turned to leave. She moved with that same fluid grace, turning on her heel. Then she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Her expression softened. Just a degree. It looked almost kind. "If you are wise, Evan Hale, you will not follow the river, and you will not go into your basement." She walked away, disappearing into the tall grass as if she were made of smoke. Evan stood on the porch, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed the conversation. "If you are wise, Evan Hale." He froze. He had introduced himself yesterday as Evan Hale, but today he had only said Evan. Wait. He replayed the memory of the river encounter. "I am Evan. Evan Hale." Okay. He had told her his name. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He was losing it. Paranoia was setting in. He turned to go back inside, shaken. He stopped at the mailbox at the end of the driveway. He hadn't checked it yet. It was an old rusted metal box on a leaning post. There was a piece of paper nailed to the wooden post. Not mailed, nailed. Evan pulled it free. The nail screeched as it came out. It was a formal notice on heavy cardstock. The header bore the seal of the township, but the logo beneath it was unfamiliar. A stylized globe with a grid over it, labeled Lattice Meridian Group. Notice of mandatory survey. To the occupant of Parcel 409. Please be advised that a public safety assessment of the local watershed and seismic stability zones has been scheduled for your property. Survey crews will require access to all exterior and subterranean structures. Scheduled date, 2 days from receipt. Failure to comply may result in municipal fines or eminent domain action under Public Safety Statute 77B. Evan stared at the paper. He had not requested a survey. He had just bought the house. The ink looked fresh. Subterranean structures. He looked back at the house. at the dark slant of the basement door with the cut tape. He looked toward the river, where the three women were hiding from everyone. Evan folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He looked at the horizon. The quiet life he had bought was gone. The noise had found him, and for the first time in a long time. Evan didn't feel like retreating. He felt the old engineer's itch, the need to fix a broken system. He went inside and locked the door. The town hall was a building designed to drain the hope out of anyone who entered it. It smelled of lemon floor wax, damp wool, and the slow, grinding death of urgency. Evan Hale stood at the counter, watching the town clerk type with agonizing slowness on a keyboard that sounded like it was full of breadcrumbs. Evan tapped the notice on the counter. "I did not request a survey," Evan said. "I own the property. I have the deed. I have the title insurance. I did not ask for a public safety assessment." The clerk, a woman named Mrs. Gable who looked like she had been carved out of a dried apple, did not look up. "It is routine," she said. "It is not routine to have people digging in my basement," Evan said. "This says subterranean structures. That implies excavation." Mrs. Gable stopped typing. She adjusted her glasses. "It is mandatory. Mr. Hale, it is part of the new Watershed Protection Initiative." Evan looked around the office. It was a small room, cluttered with filing cabinets that had not been fully closed since the 90s. On the wall behind Mrs. Gable, there was a poster. It was glossy, high definition, and completely out of place among the faded corkboards. It showed a pristine river flowing through green hands. The text at the bottom read, "Lattice Meridian Group, protecting tomorrow's flow today." "Who are they?" Evan asked, pointing at the poster. Mrs. Gable glanced at the poster, then back at her screen. Her eyes flicked to a manila folder on her desk. It was sealed with red tape. She moved her elbow slightly, covering the corner of the folder. "They are consultants," she said. "They are helping the township update its zoning maps. It is above my pay grade, frankly." Evan leaned in. "Mrs. Gable, why is a global corporation interested in the drainage of a town with a population of 2,000? Mrs. Gable forced a smile. It was the kind of smile flight attendants gave right before the plane hit turbulence. "We are very lucky to have their investment," she recited. "Now, the crew will be there in 2 days. Please ensure your gates are unlocked." Evan realized he was talking to a wall that was afraid of losing its pension. He walked out of the office, the bell above the door chiming with mocking cheerfulness. The town of Oakhaven was waking up. It was a picturesque place, the kind of town people drove through to buy antiques and apple butter. But as Evan walked down Main Street, he noticed more of the glossy posters. They were stapled to telephone poles and taped inside shop windows. Lattice Meridian Group, safety, security, sustainability. He stopped at the local garage to get a bottle of water from the vending machine. An older man in grease-stained coveralls was wiping his hands on a rag near the open bay doors. "You are the guy who bought the old Miller place," the mechanic said. He didn't look up from his hands. Evan nodded. "Word travels fast." "Small town," the mechanic said. He spat on the asphalt. "Name is Jim. I heard you were asking questions at the hall." Evan paused, the water bottle halfway to his mouth. "Mrs. Gable talks fast, too." Jim laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "Gable does not talk, but the walls are thin. Listen, son, you are an engineer, right? That is what Arthur said." "Yeah, structural." "Then you know how load-bearing works," Jim said. "You put enough weight on something, it breaks. Lattice Meridian is putting a lot of weight on this town. They bought the old mill. They bought the lumber yard. Now they are inspecting basements near the river." Why? Evan asked. Jim shrugged. He looked Evan in the eye. His eyes were hard and cynical. If they say it is for safety, it is for money. Always. You watch your back out there. Hail. That valley eats people. Evan drove home with a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The mechanic's warning sat heavy in his mind alongside Sierra's voice. We are hiding from everyone. When he turned onto his gravel driveway, the knot pulled tight. There were flags on his land, small, bright red survey flags on wire stakes. They ran along the edge of his property line, spaced with military neatness, exactly 10 feet apart. They went right up to the tree line. They stopped just short of the river path. Evan slammed the truck door. He walked over to the nearest flag and ripped it out of the ground. He looked at the house. It stood silent in the afternoon shadows. The windows reflected the trees. It felt watched. He spent the rest of the daylight hours pacing. He checked the locks. He checked the basement door again. The tape was still cut, but the door was closed. He put a padlock on it. It felt like a gesture, not a solution. Evening came, bringing the blue-black twilight that seemed to rise from the river itself. Evan was in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker, trying to decide if a third pot was a bad idea, when he heard a tap on the back door. It was not a knock, it was a scratch. He opened the door. Nemi stood there. She was wearing a yellow raincoat that was clearly stolen from a child scarecrow or a very small fisherman. The sleeves ended at her elbows. She was holding a plastic transistor radio in both hands like it was a dead bird. It stopped singing, Nemi said. Evan looked at her. Her eyes were wide, swirling with that impossible violet light. She looked like a guilty kid who had broken a vase. Nemi, Evan said. You are not supposed to be here. Sierra said stay away from the river. Nemi said. She did not say stay away from the house. She held out the radio. It was an old red brick of a thing, probably from the 80s. Can humans fix talking boxes? She asked. Evan sighed. He stepped aside. Come in. Quickly. Nemi stepped into the kitchen. She looked around with intense fascination. She touched the refrigerator door. She touched the handle of the oven. She poked a bag of onions on the counter. It is cold here, she said. It is a kitchen. Evan said, put the radio on the table. Nemi placed the radio down gently. Then she reached into the pocket of her raincoat. I have payment, she said proudly. She dumped a handful of stones onto the table. They clattered loudly. Evan picked one up. It was cut into a perfect dodecahedron. It was translucent pink, glowing faintly from within. It looked like hard candy, but it had the weight of lead. It was definitely a gemstone, and it was definitely not quartz or anything geologically native to this solar system. Nemi, Evan said gently. You cannot pay me with space diamonds. Why? Nemi asked. Are they not pretty? They are very pretty, Evan said. That is the problem. If I try to spend these, people will ask questions. No, keep your money. Let me look at the radio. He sat down and popped the back casing off the radio. Nemi hovered over his shoulder, smelling of ozone and rain. Battery terminal is corroded, Evan muttered. And the solder joint on the speaker wire is broken. He fetched his soldering iron from the toolkit. He plugged it in. Nemi watched the tip of the iron heat up. Her eyes went wide. You make fire with a string? She asked. It is electricity, Evan said. He touched the iron to the solder. A wisp of smoke curled up. He reconnected the wire with a deft, practiced movement. Nemi let out a soft sound of awe. It was genuine wonder. She looked at Evan's hands as if he were performing high magic. You fix things, she whispered. You make the broken parts hold hands again. Evan smiled despite himself. That is one way to put it. He snapped the case back on and turned the dial. Static hissed. Then a classic rock station blared through the speaker. Nemi clapped her hands. It sings. The back door opened. Evan spun around. He hadn't heard footsteps. Sira stood in the doorway. She was not wearing a raincoat. She was wearing Evan's flannel jacket again, and she looked furious. Nemi, she said. Her voice was low, vibrating with authority. Nemi froze. She grabbed the radio. Sira, look. He fixed the talking box. He used a fire stick. Sira did not look at the radio. She looked at Evan. Her gaze swept over the kitchen, landing on the soldering iron, the tools scattered on the table, and the calm competence in Evan's posture. She paused. The anger in her face shifted, replaced by a calculating assessment. She looked at his hands. I told you to stay hidden, Sira said to Nemi. I was hidden. Nemi argued, I was in the house. Sira sighed. It was a very human sound. Go back to the water. Vial is pacing a trench in the sand. Nemi looked at Evan. Thank you. Evan, who fixes things. She grabbed her gemstones and bolted out the door, clutching the radio to her chest. Silence stretched in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Sira stepped inside and closed the door. She did not relax. You let her in, Sira said. She knocked. Evan said, I was not going to leave her on the porch. Sira walked to the table. She ran a finger along the edge of the wood. Her skin was so pale it looked like porcelain against the grain. We need to establish rules. Evan Hale, she said. I thought we had rules. Evan said, I pretend I do not see you. That is not enough, Sira said. She looked up, locking eyes with him. Nemi is young. She does not understand the danger. Vial sees threats in every shadow. I am trying to keep us alive. Evan unplugged the soldering iron. I am not a threat. Sira. Sira laughed softly. It was a bitter sound. You are a human. You live in a world of cameras and phones and men who sign papers to own the earth. You are a threat by proximity. She stepped closer. The air around her felt charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. I need your word, she said. You will never approach the river again without my permission. Not for mapping, not for a walk, not to check your property lines. Evan looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine, the leader trying to hold a crumbling situation together. But he also saw the exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders. He felt a sudden wave of relief. He didn't want to stumble upon them again. He didn't want the ambiguity. I agree, Evan said. I will stay on the porch. I will stay in the house. The river is yours. Sira studied him. She seemed surprised by his easy capitulation. Thank you, she said. Movement caught Evan's eye. Outside the window, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Vial. She was outside, inspecting the motion sensor floodlight Evan had installed on the corner of the house. She reached up, her movements fluid and silent, and adjusted the angle of the sensor by a single millimeter. What is she doing? Evan asked. Optimizing your firing angles, Sira said. Evan blinked. My what? She is improving your defense grid, Sira corrected, though her tone suggested the first term was more accurate. Vial does not like blind spots. Evan looked back at Sira. What are you? He asked. And do not tell me water spirits. You know what a radio is. Your friend knows tactical defense. You have bioluminescent biology, but you speak English with a syntax that sounds like a diplomat. Sira hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at Evan. We are displaced, she said. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters. She said, we are displaced. We are unwanted. and we are alive. For now. She turned to leave. Wait, Evan said. Sierra stopped, her hand on the doorknob. The basement, Evan said. The tape was cut. Did you go down there? Sierra did not turn around. The house remembers things. Evan, be careful what you ask it to show you. She opened the door and vanished into the night. That night, the house did not sleep. The thrumming returned, louder than before. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical sensation. The floorboards vibrated against the soles of Evan's feet. He went into the basement hallway. The pipes running along the ceiling were humming. He touched a copper water line. It was vibrating in perfect sympathy with the sound from the river. It felt like the house was wired into the water. Like the plumbing wasn't just plumbing, but circuitry. Evan checked the padlock on the basement door. It held. But the air seeping out from the crack beneath the door was freezing cold. The next day, the enemy arrived in a black SUV. It was a sleek, monstrous vehicle with tinted windows and government plates. It crunched up the gravel driveway at noon, parking right next to Evan's battered pickup truck. Evan was on the porch, drinking coffee he didn't want. He watched a man get out of the SUV. The man was handsome in a way that made Evan instantly defensive. He had perfect hair, a perfect suit that cost more than Evan's mortgage, and a smile that showed too many teeth. "Mr. Hale!" the man called out, waving as if they were old friends. Evan did not wave back. "Who are you?" The man walked up the steps, extending a hand. "Miles Ketter, Federal Environmental Liaison. I work with the Regional Watershed Authority, and strictly off the record, I consult for Lattice Meridian." Evan did not shake the hand. Miles didn't seem offended. He just withdrew the hand and smoothed his tie. "Beautiful property," Miles said, looking out toward the river. "Just beautiful. A bit of a fixer-upper, though. Bold choice, buying restricted watershed property." "It wasn't restricted when I bought it 3 days ago," Evan said. Miles chuckled. "Ah, paperwork. It lags behind reality, doesn't it? The designation was updated this morning, retroactively, of course, for safety." He turned his gaze to Evan. His eyes were pale blue and completely devoid of warmth. "We need to set up some monitoring equipment," Miles said, "just down by the river bend. And we will need to access that basement of yours, checking for seepage, old chemical runoff." Evan leaned against the doorframe. He crossed his arms. "Do you have a warrant?" Evan asked. Miles smiled. "We don't need warrants for environmental hazards, Mr. Hale. It is a public health matter." "Then you have a court order?" Evan countered. Miles sighed. He reached into his jacket pocket. Evan tensed, but Miles only pulled out a pair of sunglasses. "You are going to be difficult," Miles said. "I like that. It shows character. But here is the reality. Evan, can I call you Evan? You made a mistake. You bought a house that sits on a very complicated piece of geology. We are just here to fix it. Get off my land," Evan said. Miles put on the sunglasses. "I will go," he said, "for today. But the survey crew arrives tomorrow, and they will have the sheriff with them. Think about it, Evan. We can write you a check for the property. A very large check. You could walk away with a profit. Or you can stay and drown in legal fees." Miles turned and walked back to the SUV. He paused at the door. "Nice view, though," he called back. Shame about the neighbors. He got in and drove away. Evan stood frozen. Shame about the neighbors. He felt a presence behind him. He spun around. Sierra was standing in the shadows of the porch roof. She had appeared instantly, silently. She was staring at the retreating dust cloud of the SUV. "He knows," Evan said. "He suspects," Sierra corrected. Her voice was tight. If he knew, that vehicle would have been an armored transport. She stepped out into the sunlight. Her skin looked pale and fragile in the harsh noon light. "Who is he?" Evan asked. "A hunter," Sira said. She looked at Evan. Her expression was unreadable. "He offered to buy the house," Evan said. "He said it sits on complicated geology." Sira nodded. She walked to the railing and looked at the river. "The river bend is a soft point," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means the barrier between places is thin here," Sira said. "My people, our technology, it relies on resonance, geomagnetic seams. This land is an anchor. It is where the door opens." Evan felt the pieces click into place. The cheap price, the missing owner, the sealed basement. The house was bait, Evan said. It wasn't abandoned. It was left here to catch you. Sira looked at him. Yes. Evan looked at her. He looked at the fear she was trying to hide. He looked at the way her hands gripped the railing, white-knuckled. He stepped closer. He didn't think about it. He just moved into her space. Sira flinched, then held her ground. Evan stopped a foot away. He could feel the heat radiating off her. It wasn't just body heat. It was an active energy, a low-level hum that made the hair on his arm stand up. She smelled like ozone and crushed lilies. "They are coming back tomorrow," Evan said. "With the sheriff." Sira looked up at him. Her eyes were searching his face, looking for the betrayal she expected. "You should sell," she whispered. "Take the money. Leave. Is that what you want?" Evan asked. Sira's breath hitched. "No." "Then I am staying," Evan said. Sira stared at him. "Why? You do not know us. You owe us nothing." "I know enough," Evan said. "I know that guy in the suit is a predator, and I know you are terrified." He wanted to reach out. He wanted to touch her arm to reassure her, but he kept his hands at his sides. "I want to help," Evan said, "but I am not going to touch you. I am not going to cross any line unless you tell me to." Sira looked at his hands, hanging empty at his sides. She looked at his face. Her eyes flickered with something raw. It was hunger, not just for safety, but for connection, for someone to see her and not try to cage her. She took a half step toward him. The distance between them collapsed to inches. "If you choose us," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you choose danger. You choose a war you do not understand." Evan held her gaze. "I choose honesty," he said. "And I choose consent. And I choose not letting people with badges take what isn't theirs." Sira's lips parted. She looked like she was about to smile or cry or kiss him. The air between them crackled. Movement in the trees shattered the moment. Vial burst out of the undergrowth at the edge of the lawn. She didn't shout. She just signaled, a sharp, cutting motion with her hand across her throat, then pointed at the sky. Sira snapped back to reality. "The river," she said. "Now." She grabbed Evan's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. They ran toward the tree line. "What is it?" Evan asked, stumbling as Sira pulled him through the tall grass. "Eyes," Sira said. They reached the cover of the willows. Vial was there, crouched low, her eyes fixed on the water. Nemi was huddled behind a tree, looking pale. "Look," Vial whispered. Evan peered through the branches. Over the river, skimming just inches above the surface, were drones. They were not the commercial quadcopters Evan had seen before. These were sleek, black insect-like machines. They moved in silence, no motor whine, just a faint displacement of air. They had single red eyes, sensors sweeping the water. "They are scanning for energy signatures," Sira hissed. Nemi made a small, whimpering sound. Suddenly, the river flashed. It was a pulse of light from deep underwater. Violet, bright. For a heartbeat, the water became transparent. Evan saw it. Deep in the riverbed, a shadow was moving. It looked like a rectangular slab of darkness. A door. It was opening and closing like a shutter, blinking in panic. The drone swiveled instantly toward the flash. They saw it, Vielle said. She sounded calm, which was more terrifying than panic. They need to hide, Evan said. We cannot hide in the water, Sierra said. The scanners will pick up our biometrics. No, Evan said. Not the water. The land. He pointed to a concrete ridge jutting out of the bank about 50 yards down. It was overgrown with vines. The storm culvert, Evan said. It runs under my yard. It connects to the old drainage system. It is too small, Nemi said. Not for us, Evan said. Trust me. Sierra looked at him. She nodded. Move, she ordered. They scrambled along the bank, keeping low. The drones hovered over the spot where the light had flashed, circling like vultures. Evan pulled the vines away from the culvert opening. It was a concrete pipe, 3 feet wide, dry and dark. Go, Evan said. Nemi crawled in first. Vielle followed, moving backwards to keep her eyes on the drones. Sierra stopped at the entrance. She looked at Evan. Come with us, she said. I cannot, Evan said. If they see me, I can talk my way out of it. I am the owner. If they see you. Sierra hesitated. Then she touched his cheek. Her hand was warm. Thank you, she whispered. She disappeared into the darkness of the pipe. Evan let the vines fall back into place. He leaned against the concrete, trying to slow his breathing. The drone circled for another minute, then turned and glided back toward the far side of the valley. They were gone. Evan waited 10 minutes before he whispered into the pipe. They are gone. Sierra crawled out first. She was covered in dust and cobwebs. She stood up and brushed herself off. She looked shaken. The utility tunnels, Evan said, staring at the pipe. They were never just for drainage, were they? No, Sierra said. They are the ventilation system for the facility below. Facility? Evan asked. Sierra looked at the river. The water was dark again. Sierra, Evan said, I need the truth, all of it. If I am going to protect you, I need to know the stakes. Sierra looked at her sisters. Nemi was trembling. Vielle was checking a scrape on her arm. We are not just neighbors. Evan, Sierra said softly. We are linked. Linked how? Biologically, she said. We share a resonance frequency. It is how we communicate without speaking. It is how we feel each other's pain. She stepped closer to him. Her eyes were full of a terrible, heavy sadness. If Miles captures one of us, Sierra said, he does not just have a prisoner. He has a key. He can use that one to track the others. Anywhere on Earth. Evan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. If he takes Nemi, he finds you, Evan said. Sierra nodded. If one falls, we all fall. That is why we cannot run. That is why we cannot leave the river. We are tethered to each other, and we are tethered to this place. She looked at the house on the hill. And now, she said, you are tethered to us. Evan looked at the house. He looked at the 3 women standing in the mud. He realized his life as a solitary man was over. He also realized he didn't mind. Let's get you inside, Evan said. I have a basement to open. Sierra looked at him, surprised. I thought you said it was dangerous. She said, it is. Evan said, but if Miles is coming back with a warrant tomorrow, we need to know what is down there before he does. He turned and began the climb back up the hill. Sierra watched him for a moment. then signaled to Vial and Nemi. They followed him, leaving the river behind. 4 shadows moving together against the dark. The transformation of the farmhouse began quietly, driven by the manic energy of a man who solved problems with structural reinforcement. Evan Hale did not sleep much in the 48 hours following the visit from Miles Ketter. Instead, he turned his home into a fortress, painstakingly disguising every upgrade as a rustic renovation. He reinforced the shutters not with fresh pine, but with steel plates sandwiched between layers of weathered oak. He installed motion-activated cameras inside birdhouses, drilling out the eyes of wooden cardinals and blue jays to hide the lenses. He built signal jammers out of stripped microwave parts and wired them into the attic insulation, creating a dead zone that would turn any unauthorized listening device into a brick of static. Sierra watched him from the edge of the woods, or, when the sunlight was too harsh, from the shadows of his kitchen. She did not offer to help with the manual labor, but she studied his hands with a focus that made the back of Evan's neck prickle. "You are building a siege engine," she said on the second afternoon. She was leaning against the porch railing, wearing a pair of his old sweatpants and a t-shirt that hung off her slender frame. "I am catching up on deferred maintenance," Evan said, tightening a bolt on a sensor array disguised as a gutter downspout. "If anyone asks, I am just a paranoid city guy afraid of bears." Sierra looked at the camera hidden in the fake owl mounted on the roof. "And if the bears have frequency scanners?" she asked. "Then the bears are going to have a headache," Evan said. He climbed down the ladder and wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag. He looked at her. The distance between them was 5 feet, but the air in that gap felt heavy, charged with the static of things unsaid. They were 2 adults circling each other, aware of the danger, aware of the attraction, and terrified that one would ignite the other. Sierra held his gaze for a second too long, then looked away toward the river. "Vial thinks you are wasting your time," she said softly. "She thinks fortifications just tell the enemy where the target is. Vial is welcome to dig a foxhole in the garden," Evan said. "But I like indoor plumbing." The screen door banged open, shattering the moment. Nemi burst onto the porch, clutching a paperback book she had scavenged from a box in the living room. It was a trashy romance novel Evan's aunt had left behind years ago, featuring a shirtless Highlander on the cover. "Evan!" Nemi shouted, waving the book. "I have a question about human mating rituals." Evan choked on his own breath. He coughed, looking at Sierra, who raised an eyebrow with amusement. "What is it, Nemi?" Evan asked, bracing himself. "The book says the Duke's eyes were pools of molten desire," Nemi read, her voice ringing with dramatic seriousness, "and that he claimed her lips with a hunger that shattered her soul." She looked up, wide-eyed. "Is this fatal?" Nemi asked. "Soul-shattering sounds like a medical emergency, and molten eyes would blind you." Sierra covered her mouth to hide a smile. Evan rubbed his temples. "It is a metaphor. Nemi. It means he liked her a lot." Nemi frowned, flipping the page. "Then why did he rip her bodice?" "That seems inefficient. Clothing is for warmth, because humans are complicated and dramatic," Evan said, taking the book gently from her hands. "And maybe you should stick to the instruction manuals I gave you." "But the instruction manuals do not have heaving bosoms," Nemi protested. "Go help Vial with the perimeter," Sierra ordered, her voice trembling with suppressed laughter. Nemi sighed, grabbed a handful of almonds from her pocket, and marched off toward the woods, muttering about inefficient dukes. The humor was a thin veneer over the tension. Later that afternoon, Vial emerged from the tree line to teach Evan silent communication. It was a humbling experience. Vial did not speak. She moved with a lethal economy, her fingers flashing signs that Evan struggled to mimic. 2 fingers tap, enemy sighted, fist close, hold position, palm flat, slicing down, immediate threat, lethal force authorized. I did not realize neighborly etiquette included tactical communication, Evan joked, trying to flex his cramping fingers. Vielle stared at him. Her eyes were hard, unblinking. Dead neighbors are quiet neighbors, she said. Stay alive. It was the most she had said to him in 3 days. The reprieve ended the next morning. A black sedan followed by a white corporate truck rolled up the driveway. This time, Miles Ketter was not alone. He was accompanied by a woman in a slate gray suit who looked like she had been manufactured in a boardroom. She carried a tablet as if it were a weapon. Evan met them at the bottom of the porch steps. He had his phone in his shirt pocket, the camera lens peeking out, recording. "Mr. Hale," Miles said, his smile tight and predatory. "I see you have been busy. The birdhouses are a nice touch. Who is this?" Evan asked, ignoring the compliment. "This is Ms. Sterling," Miles said, "legal counsel for Lattice Meridian Group." Ms. Sterling did not offer a hand. She tapped her tablet. "Mr. Hale, we are here to discuss the revised zoning of Parcel 409. As you were notified, the watershed assessment has identified critical instability in the riverbank. I have an engineering degree," Evan said. "The bank is granite bedrock. It is not unstable." Ms. Sterling swiped a finger across her screen. "Our independent geological survey disagrees. Under the Federal Watershed Protection Act, and in conjunction with local safety statutes, Lattice Meridian has been granted stewardship of the restoration project." She looked up. Her eyes were dead. "We are prepared to offer you 120% of the market value for the property. This is a courtesy. If you refuse, we will proceed with eminent domain filing. You will be compensated, of course, but the sum will be significantly less, and you will still lose the house." It was a threat wrapped in silk, eminent domain, the power of the state to take what it wanted, wielded by a corporation wearing the state like a costume. Evan felt a cold rage settle in his stomach. He patted his pocket, ensuring the phone was secure. "You can file whatever you want," Evan said, "but eminent domain requires a public hearing. It requires proof of public necessity, and I will drag that hearing out for 10 years. I will hire every independent geologist in the state to drill holes in your survey." Miles stepped forward. He dropped the charm. "You are a small man standing in front of a very large train. Evans, do not be stupid. I am not moving," Evan said. "Get off my land." "Ms." Sterling sighed, as if she were dealing with an unruly toddler. "We will file the petition tomorrow," she said. "Enjoy the view while you have it." They returned to their vehicles. As Miles opened his car door, he looked up at the house. He looked right at the attic vent where the jammer was hidden. He winked. Evan watched them leave. He stopped the recording on his phone. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the fight. That night, the valley went dark. It started with a brownout, the lights dimming to a sickly yellow, and then the grid died completely. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The silence of the house became absolute, except it didn't. A low, throbbing vibration began to rise from the floorboards. Evan stood in the kitchen, holding a flashlight he didn't need to turn on. Light was bleeding through the cracks in the floor, a soft, pulsating violet light. He walked to the basement door. The padlock he had placed there rattled against the wood. The metal was vibrating. He unlocked it. He opened the door. The stairs were bathed in a glow that shouldn't have been possible. Evan walked down. The air grew colder with every step. smelling of ozone and wet stone. He reached the bottom and stopped. The basement was no longer just a basement. It was a concrete box that had been infected by something alien. Veins of silver alloy threaded through the walls, pulsing with light. They looked like roots, or perhaps nerves, growing out of the foundation and wrapping around the support beams. They converged on a large, complex node in the center of the room, a pedestal of twisted metal that hummed with a harmonic frequency. Sira was standing there. She had her hand pressed against the metal node. The light in the room pulsed in time with the light under her skin. She looked exhausted, her head bowed, her hair floating slightly in the charged air. She opened her eyes and looked at Evan. "The power grid failed," she whispered. "I had to divert the load. Your house, it is hungry." Evan walked over to the wall. He touched one of the silver veins. It was warm. "What is this?" he asked. Sira pulled her hand away from the pedestal. The light dimmed but remained steady. The previous owner, Miller, was not just eccentric. She said he was a sympathizer, a guardian. She walked around the pedestal, trailing her fingers through the air as if touching invisible strings. 10 years ago, a ship crashed in the Mojave. The government said it was a weather balloon. It was a transport vessel carrying refugees from my world. We were fleeing a regime that views biology as currency. She looked at Evan. "There is a treaty. Evan, a secret agreement between your leaders and the regime that hunts us. Earth gets technology, clean energy, advanced materials, and in exchange, they turn a blind eye when the regime's hunters come to collect us." Evan stared at her. "The posters in town, Lattice Meridian Group, they are selling you," Evan said. Sira nodded. "Not all of your leaders know. It is a faction, a shadow group inside the intelligence community and the corporate sector. Lattice Meridian is the front. They harvest the tech, and they hand us back to the hunters. Or worse, they keep us and take us apart to see how we work." She gestured to her own body, to the glowing patterns. "We are not just refugees, Evan. We are witnesses. We saw the coup on our homeworld. We saw the High Council murdered. And the evidence. It is not on a drive. It is encoded in us." She tapped her chest. "My resonance pattern contains the flight logs. Vael carries the tactical data. Nemi carries the diplomatic archives. If we are captured, the truth dies. If we can get this data to the public, to the parts of your government that still believe in law, it could stop the treaty. It could prevent a war." Evan sat down on a crate. The weight of it was crushing. He was just an engineer. He fixed bridges. He didn't fight interstellar conspiracies. "Why here?" he asked. "Because Miller built this," Sira said, gesturing to the room. "He found the soft point in the river. He built this amplifier to help us open the gate, to move refugees to safe zones. But they found him. He disappeared before he could finish it." She looked at Evan, her eyes pleading. "We need allies. Evan. But allies are how you get betrayed. Miller trusted the wrong people." Evan looked at the silver veins in the wall. He thought about Miles Ketter's smile. He thought about the mechanic's warning. "You have an ally," Evan said. Sira looked away. "You are one man." "I am an engineer," Evan said, "and I am stubborn." He stood up. He walked toward her. The room was small, and the pedestal took up most of the space. He had to squeeze past it to get to her. They were standing inches apart. The light from the walls cast long, shifting shadows across their faces. Sira looked up at him. The fear was there, but beneath it, the hunger was back. The magnetic pull that had been there since the river. "Why do you stay?" she whispered. You could leave. You could be safe. I don't want to be safe, Evan said. I want to be here. He felt the heat of her skin. The air between them seemed to thicken. They were arguing, but it wasn't about politics. It was about the terrifying precipice of intimacy. You are dangerous, Sira said. You make me want things I cannot afford. Like what? Evan asked. Like stillness, she said, like stopping. She took a breath, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Evan looked at her lips. He looked at the pulse of light at the base of her throat. Do you want me closer? He asked out loud. The question hung in the air, absolute and demanding. Sira trembled. Her eyes searched his face. Yes, she whispered. She pulled back a fraction of an inch, a reflex of survival. But if you move, she added, her voice fierce and low, you do not do it because of the moment. You do it with your eyes open. You do it knowing I might bring death to your door. My eyes are open, Evan said. He moved closer, slowly, giving her every millisecond to pull away. She didn't. He cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was electric. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not the romance novel kiss Nemi had read about. It was restrained fire. It was two people who had been lonely for a lifetime trying to swallow that loneliness in a single breath. It was desperate and hard and tasted of ozone. Sira made a sound in her throat, a soft, broken noise, and gripped his shirt, pulling him harder against her. For a moment, the world dissolved. There was only the hum of the alien alloy and the heat of her body. Then, she broke it. She pulled back, gasping for air, her eyes wide and dark. Not here, she said. She looked at the ceiling, at the world above where drones and satellites watched. Not while we are being watched. Not while we are hunted. Evan nodded. He stepped back, though every nerve in his body screamed to close the distance again. Okay, he said. He wasn't ashamed. He hadn't taken anything. He had asked, and she had answered. Okay, he repeated. The morning brought a cold reality check. Evan sat at his computer reviewing the footage from the confrontation with Miles. He wanted to upload it to a cloud server, to send it to the journalist contact he had found in his old Rolodex. He opened the file, static. The video was a jagged mess of digital noise. The audio was a high-pitched screech. He tried the backup file. Same thing. He tried the footage from the birdhouse cameras. Corrupted. He sat back, staring at the screen. The signal jammers should have protected his internal network. Unless the corruption wasn't external. Unless it was a virus planted during the blackout. Then, the static cleared for a single second. One frame appeared on the screen. It was Miles Ketter. He was looking directly into the lens of Evan's phone. He was smiling. The image froze there, mocking him. Evan slammed his fist onto the desk. They had access to his phone. They had access to everything. He needed to go into town. He needed a burner phone. He drove his truck down the winding valley road. A sheriff's deputy cruiser was parked on the shoulder near the bridge. The deputy waved him down. Evan slowed and rolled down the window. It was Deputy Miller, no relation to the previous owner, just a common name. Evan had met him once at a diner. Tail light is out. Hail, the deputy said. It was working this morning, Evan said. Things break, the deputy said. He leaned on the doorframe. He wasn't writing a ticket. He was just looking at Evan. Heard you had some suits up at your place, the deputy said. Big city lawyers. Just a zoning dispute, Evan said. The deputy nodded. He chewed on a toothpick. You know, this valley is quiet. People like it quiet. When folks start making noise, digging up old history. Accidents happen. Roads get slippery. Houses catch fire. It was a threat, delivered with a country drawl. Evan looked at the deputy's face. Then he saw it. In the deputy's left ear, there was an earpiece. It wasn't the standard issue police radio bud. It was sleek, black, and pulsed with a faint, rhythmic blue light. It was the same tech Miles had used. The same tech Sierra's people were hunted for. Evan kept his face neutral. "I will fix the light, deputy." "Do that," the deputy said. "Drive safe." Evan drove away. His hands were gripping the wheel so hard the leather creaked. The local law enforcement wasn't just ignoring the problem, they were wearing the bribe. He returned to the house and went straight to the basement. Sierra, Vael, and Nemi were there. They had moved out of the culvert and into the basement room, judging it safer than the woods now that the drones were active. "They have the police," Evan said. The deputy was wearing lattice tech. Sierra nodded grimly. "It spreads like a rot." "We cannot stay here," Vael said. "We are sitting ducks." "We need to move the data," Sierra said. "We cannot broadcast it. They control the networks. We need to physically extract the evidence to a secure location. There is a resistance cell in the capital, but we cannot get there on foot." "We use the river," Evan said. Sierra looked at him. "The gate is unstable. We need a stabilizer to keep it open long enough to cross without being torn apart." "I can build one," Evan said. He gestured to the room. "I have a degree in structural engineering and a basement full of alien conductive alloy. I can build a harmonic dampener. I can stabilize the frequency." Nemi looked at him with wide eyes. "You can build a doorstop for a wormhole?" "Basically," Evan said. He spent the next 6 hours working. He cut sections of the silver alloy from the walls, apologizing to the house as he did so. He wired them into a heavy-duty marine battery and a frequency modulator he cannibalized from his high-end stereo system. It was a monstrosity of copper wire, silver alien metal, and duct tape. It looked like a science fair project gone wrong. But when he turned it on, the air in the basement hummed. The silver veins in the wall pulsed in sync with the device. "It works," Sierra whispered. "We do it tonight," Evan said, under the cover of the new moon. The river was black and silent. The air was thick with humidity. They moved in a tactical formation. Vael took point, scanning the trees with a thermal scope she had scavenged or constructed. Evan didn't ask. Evan carried the stabilizer, which weighed about 40 pounds. Sierra and Nemi flanked him. They reached the river bend. The water was calm. Vael signaled, "Clear." Sierra turned to Evan. "We have to enter the water to activate the soft point," she said. "Our bodies are the key. The stabilizer just keeps the lock open." She looked at him. "This is not a swim." "Evan." "I know," Evan said. Sierra and Vael stepped into the water. They did not strip naked this time. They wore the tactical gear they had fashioned. Dark, tight-fitting clothes. But as they waded deeper, the water began to glow. It wasn't the accidental flash from before, this was controlled. They moved with ritualistic precision, standing at specific points in the current, forming a triangle with an invisible third point. They raised their arms. The bioluminescence under their skin flared. It was blindingly bright, a complex geometry of light that projected outward, hitting the surface of the water. The water boiled, not with heat, but with energy. A shape began to rise from the depths. It was a doorway, made of water that refused to flow. Standing rigid and vertical, Evan set the stabilizer on the bank. He flipped the switch. The device hummed. The door solidified. It was a portal. Through the shimmering surface, Evan could see stars. Stars that were not in the sky above, a landscape of violet rock and silver grass. He stared, stunned. He had bought a house and accidentally inherited a border crossing disguised as a river. Nemi was staring at the gate, tears in her eyes. "Home," she whispered. Movement. A crack echoed through the valley, a sharp, dry sound that didn't belong to nature. A chunk of bark exploded from the tree trunk inches from Evan's head. "Sniper!" Vial screamed. Chaos erupted. Evan dove for the ground, dragging Nemi with him. Another shot hit the water, sending a geyser of steam into the air. Vial spun around in the water, trying to pinpoint the shooter. She raised her hand, gathering energy. A third shot rang out. Vial jerked back as if punched by an invisible giant. She collapsed into the shallow water. "Vial!" Sira screamed. The concentration broke. The portal flared wildly, turning from a stable door into a raging vortex of light. Above them, the sky lit up. Not from the portal, but from a satellite laser painting the river bend with a targeting grid. "They are locking on!" Evan yelled. He scrambled toward the water. Sira was already there, grabbing Vial by the harness and dragging her toward the bank. Evan grabbed Vial's other arm. They hauled her onto the sand. She was hit in the shoulder. The blood was dark, almost black in the moonlight. Evan pressed his hand against the wound to staunch the flow. Then he froze. The blood leaking between his fingers wasn't just pooling, it was moving. As the liquid hit the sand, it didn't soak in. It formed shapes. Tiny, perfect geometric symbols, triangles, circles, lines of code. Evan stared at his hand. It was covered in data. They weren't just carrying the evidence. They were the evidence. Every drop of their blood was a library of secrets. Vial groaned, her eyes fluttering. The stabilizer on the bank sparked and died, overloaded by the fluctuating energy. The portal collapsed with a sound like a thunderclap, leaving only the dark, rushing river and the echo of the gunshot, and the red eye of a drone, blinking in the darkness above. The silence of the house was heavier than the stone foundation it sat upon. It felt as if the timber and plaster were holding their breath, waiting for the next gunshot to shatter the walls. Evan Hale kicked the basement door shut behind them and threw the deadbolt. He, Sira, and Nemi half-carried, half-dragged Vial down the wooden stairs. Vial was conscious but pale. Her teeth gritted against a pain that would have caused a human to black out. The shoulder of her tactical suit was soaked in a dark, viscous fluid that shimmered with that terrifying geometric data in the low light of the basement. "Get her to the table," Evan said, his voice tight. They laid Vial on the workbench Evan had cleared of tools. The alien alloy in the walls pulsed with a frantic, erratic rhythm, reacting to the distress of the women in the room. Sira stood back, her hands covered in her sister's blood. She stared at her palms. And for the first time since Evan had met her, the mask of the stoic commander shattered. They were waiting. Sira hissed. The sound was sharp, brittle glass breaking. They knew the frequency. They knew the exact moment we would interface. She looked at Evan, her eyes wild with a mixture of rage and terror. How did they know? Evan, did we miss a camera? Did your signal jammer fail? "It didn't fail," Evan said, grabbing a pair of medical shears from his first aid kit. He moved to Vial's side. "They have satellites. Sira, they have thermal. We lit up the river like a flare." Sira slammed her hand against the concrete wall. The alloy veins flared bright white. "I should have seen it," she said, her voice cracking. "I am supposed to see the angles. Vial is the shield. I am the eyes. I was blind." Evan saw the collapse happening. She had been strong for too long, holding the weight of 3 lives and a dead world on her shoulders. Now, with Vial bleeding out on a workbench in a dusty basement, the structural integrity of Sira's composure was failing. "Sira," Evan said. He didn't shout. He used the calm, flat voice he used when a bridge support was buckling. I need you here. I do not know your physiology. I can stop the bleeding, but I do not know what I am sewing up. I need a director. Sierra froze. She looked at Vale, who was breathing in shallow, hitched gasps. She took a deep breath, visibly forcing the panic into a box and locking the lid. She stepped up to the table. Her face was hard again, but her eyes were wet. The bullet passed through the deltoid, Sierra said, her voice clinical. Avoid the silver tissue near the bone. That is a neural cluster. If you sever it, she loses the arm. Evan nodded. He washed his hands with alcohol, the smell stinging his nose. He picked up the forceps. Guide me, he said. For the next hour, the only sounds in the room were the hum of the alien walls and Sierra's quiet instructions. Left. Deeper. Clamp there. No. That is a vein. Bypass it. It was a gruesome, intimate dance. Evan's hands, trained for welding and drafting, moved with surprising delicacy inside the open wound. Sierra stood shoulder to shoulder with him, her fingers hovering just above the site, pointing out biology that no medical textbook on Earth had a name for. They worked as a single unit. When Evan needed gauze, Sierra had it ready before he asked. When Sierra flinched at a sound from Vael, Evan paused, letting his hand rest momentarily on her arm to steady her. The blood on their hands mixed. The intimacy of it was overwhelming, two people fighting death in a cold room, bound by a secret that could get them both killed. Finally, Evan tied off the last stitch. He taped a sterile pad over the wound. Vael let out a long, shuddering breath and her eyes drifted closed. She was sleeping, sedated by the sheer exhaustion of trauma. Evan slumped against the workbench, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Sierra leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. Nemi, who had been standing guard at the top of the stairs with a kitchen knife, came down. She looked at Vael, then at Sierra. Is she? Nemi asked, her voice small. She will heal, Sierra said softly. We heal fast, but she needs rest. Nemi sat down next to Vael's legs. She looked at the blood-stained instruments. I hate this planet, Nemi whispered. It is loud and people shoot you from the trees. I am sorry, Evan said. It is not your fault, Nemi said. But I wish we were back in the ocean of glass or even the transit station. The transit station had bad food, but nobody tried to put holes in us. She patted Vael's ankle. I will tell her a story when she wakes up, Nemi said. I am working on a new human sitcom in my head. It is called The Aggressive Doorbell. Evan looked at her, blinking. What? It is about a house where the doorbell rings itself at 3 in the morning, Nemi explained earnestly. And when the family opens the doorbell screams at them for being awake. It is a tragedy about noise pollution. A small, choked laugh escaped Evan's throat. It was hysterical, bordering on tears. But it was laughter. That sounds terrifying. Nemi, he said. It is high art, Nemi corrected. Sierra did not laugh. She stared at the floor. Miles is not just a federal liaison, she said quietly. Evan looked at her. What do you mean? Sierra looked up. Her eyes were hard again. The tactics, the sniper, the coordination. That was not standard retrieval protocol. That was a liquidation team. She stood up and paced the small room. There is a coalition, she said. We call it the Meridian Compact. Miles is a mid-level operator, but the Compact is vast. They use environmental authority as a cover. They designate land as protected, clear out the civilians, and then strip mine the area for crash sites or soft points. But why shoot? Evan asked. If they want the tech, why kill the source? Because they do not need us anymore, Sira said. Or they think they don't? Nemi spoke up from the table. I heard them, she said. When I was hiding in the culvert yesterday, Laon, the drones were transmitting audio. What did you hear? Evan asked. They were talking about an event, Nemi said. A staged event. They called it Project Blue Glass. They want to create a violent alien incident near the town. Something big. Something that scares the humans enough to demand martial law. Sira's face went pale. If they stage an attack, she said, they can seize total control of the treaty. They can claim the refugees are hostile invaders. They can justify harvesting us for parts to build weapons to defend Earth. Evan felt a cold knot in his stomach. It wasn't just greed, it was a coup. We have to stop them, Evan said. We have to expose this. Sira shook her head. No. Exposure gets us killed. We need to run. We need to find another soft point. There are no other soft points within 1,000 miles, Evan argued, and Vael cannot move. He stepped toward Sira. I have a friend. He said, Garrick. We went to college together. He writes for a major syndicate now. He is an investigative journalist. He hates corporate cover-ups more than I do. Sira looked skeptical. A human journalist? He will think you are insane. Not if I bring him something undeniable, Evan said. He looked at the glowing veins in the wall. He looked at the patterns on Sira's skin. We meet him, Evan said. We show him the truth, not a video. We show him you. Sira recoiled. You want me to walk into a human town? Among them? We disguise you, Evan said. We set a meeting. Public place. If Miles tries anything, there will be witnesses. Sira was torn. He could see the calculation running behind her eyes. Risk versus reward. Survival versus exposure. It is a trap, she said. It is already a trap, Evan countered. We are in the cage. Sira, the only way out is to break the bars while people are watching. Sira looked at Vael's sleeping form. She looked at Nemi, who was trying to braid a piece of copper wire. Okay, Sira whispered. We try your way. But if it goes wrong, Evan, if it goes wrong, you leave us. You run. I am not running, Evan said. Later that night, the house was quiet. Nemi had fallen asleep on a pile of blankets next to Vael. The hum of the basement walls had settled into a low, rhythmic thrum. Evan was in the kitchen, staring at his burner phone. He had sent the message to Garrick. Need to meet. Life or death. Bring a tape recorder. Oak Haven Diner. Noon. Garrick had replied with one word. Listening. Evan put the phone down. He felt a presence in the doorway. Sira stood there. She had washed the blood off her hands and arms. She was wearing one of his oversized t-shirts, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked small, vulnerable, and dangerously beautiful. You are staring at the phone like it is a bomb, she said. It might be, Evan said. He turned to face her. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the reinforced shutters. Sira walked into the room. She didn't stop at the other side of the table. She walked right up to him. Why are you doing this? She asked. Her voice was low, trembling. You could have walked away 12 times, and you could have sold the house. You could have left us in the river. I told you, Evan said. I don't like bullies. That is a lie, Sira said. It is not just principles. Evan. She stepped closer. The heat of her body hit him. You look at me, she said. You look at me like I am not a monster, like I am not a complication. You are a complication, Evan said. his voice rough. You are the most beautiful complication I have ever seen. Sierra's breath hitched. I am afraid, she whispered. I know, Evan said. I am too. No, Sierra said. Not of the guns. I am afraid of this, of wanting this. She reached out and brushed her fingers along his jaw. Her skin was cool, but the touch sent a shockwave through him that nearly buckled his knees. Wanting makes me weak, she said. It makes me hesitate. A leader cannot hesitate. Evan reached up and covered her hand with his. He didn't pull it away. He pressed it closer to his face. It doesn't make you weak, he said. It gives you something to fight for. Sierra looked up at him. Her eyes were huge, swirling with that violet storm. Tell me to stop if you need to, she whispered. Her thumb traced the line of his lower lip. It was a test. She was giving him the power, the control, the weapon to destroy him or save him. Evan closed his eyes for a second, fighting the urge to simply crush her against him. He opened them. Don't stop, he said. Unless you don't want this. Sierra let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. She chose him. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him down. The kiss was a collision. It wasn't the tentative exploration of the basement. It was a claiming. Sierra kissed him with the desperation of someone standing on the edge of a cliff. Her hands tangled in his hair, her body pressing against his, hard and trembling. Evan wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly, anchoring her. He felt the vibration of her resonance against his chest, a physical hum of energy that synchronized with his own heartbeat. They stumbled back against the counter. Evan swept a pile of junk mail onto the floor without breaking the kiss. For a minute, there was nothing else. No Miles Ketter, no sniper, no dying world. Just the taste of her, the heat of her, the overwhelming reality of her existence in his arms. Sierra pulled back, gasping. Her forehead rested against his. Evan. She breathed. She was shaking. We have to stop, she said. Her voice was wrecked. Evan nodded, though his body was screaming in protest. He forced his hands to relax, to loosen their grip on her waist. Okay, he said. Sierra looked at him. Her lips were swollen, her eyes bright. If we survive tomorrow, she said, I am not stopping next time. Promise? Evan asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. That is a threat, Mr. Hale, she said. She kissed him one last time, soft, lingering, a seal on a contract, and then pulled away. She vanished into the darkness of the hallway, leaving Evan standing in the kitchen, his heart hammering a rhythm that felt like a war drum. The next morning was a blur of preparation. Evan rigged the house. He set up a series of microwave emitters in the attic and the shed, programmed to broadcast a chaotic array of energy signatures. It would look, to any sensor, like the house was a hive of activity, drawing attention away from the town. Then, the disguise. Sierra stood in the living room. She was wearing jeans that were too long for her, cuffed at the ankles, and a thick hooded sweatshirt. The problem is the glow, Evan said. Sierra produced a small jar of clear gel from her pocket. Photorefractive film, she said. We use it for infiltration. She rubbed the gel onto her face and hands. As it dried, the luminous violet patterns faded. Her skin took on a more matte, human texture. She still looked ethereal, too pale, too sharp, but she could pass for a human woman who didn't get enough sun. She pulled the hood up. How do I look? She asked. Like a college student who hates mornings? Evan said. Perfect. They left Nemi to guard Vael. Nemi held a flare gun Evan had found in his emergency kit. If the aggressive doorbells come, Nemi said, looking grim, I will light them up. Stay in the basement, Evan warned. Do not open the door for anyone but us. They took Evan's truck. Sierra sat in the passenger seat, huddled low. As they drove into Oakhaven, Sierra watched the town through the window. She flinched every time a car honked. It is so loud, she whispered. The audio clutter. How do you think? We don't. Usually, Evan said. He parked 2 blocks away from the diner. They walked the rest of the way. Sierra walked close to him, her arm brushing his. The town felt tense. There were more Lattice Meridian posters up. A police cruiser idled on the corner. They entered the diner. It smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee. It was crowded. The noise of silverware clinking on plates made Sierra wince. Evan spotted Garrick in a booth at the back. He looked older than Evan remembered, graying temples, tired eyes, a cynical slant to his mouth. Garrick looked up as they approached. He eyed Sierra suspiciously. You brought a date to a source meeting? Garrick asked. This is the source, Evan said, sliding into the booth. Sierra sat next to him. She kept her head down. Garrick raised an eyebrow. She looks like a runaway. Evan, what is this? You said life or death. It is, Evan said. Garrick, you have been writing about Lattice Meridian's land grabs for months. What if I told you the land grabs are a cover for something else? Garrick sighed. He tapped his pen on the table. Let me guess. Toxic waste? Illegal fracking? Evan, that is page 6 news. No, Evan said. Extraterrestrial trafficking. Garrick stared at him. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. Okay, I am leaving. Good to see you. Evan, maybe get some sleep. He started to slide out of the booth. Sierra moved. She reached across the table and grabbed Garrick's wrist. Her grip was iron. Sit down, she said. Garrick froze. The voice wasn't right. It was too resonant. Look, Sierra said. She put her other hand on the table, palm up. She focused. The cosmetic film rippled. A patch of skin on her palm flared to life. The violet spiral glowed bright enough to be seen even under the diner lights. It wasn't a tattoo. It was light moving under flesh. It shifted, rotating like a holographic locking mechanism. Garrick's eyes bulged. He looked at the hand, then at Sierra's face inside the hood. What the hell? He whispered. It is a flight log, Sierra said quietly. Encoded in my DNA, it proves that Lattice Meridian shot down a transport vessel 10 years ago. It proves they are holding prisoners. Garrick sat back down. He was pale. He fumbled for his recorder. Start talking, he said. Sierra began to speak. She spoke of the treaty, the compact, the planned false flag operation. Garrick took notes furiously, his hands shaking. This brings down the administration, Garrick muttered. This brings down everything. Suddenly, the noise in the diner changed. The chatter stopped. Evan looked up. Every television screen mounted on the walls, the one above the counter, the one in the corner, had switched to the same channel. A red banner scrolled across the bottom. Emergency alert. A news anchor, looking terrified, was reading a bulletin. We are receiving reports of violent incursions in the Oakhaven Valley. Authorities have confirmed the presence of hostile extraterrestrial biological entities. Residents are advised to shelter in place. These entities are considered armed and extremely dangerous. The screen cut to a shaky video. It showed a figure, blurry, glowing violet, attacking a police car. It was a deep fake. A perfect, terrifying deep fake. The diner erupted. Aliens? A man at the counter shouted. They are here! A woman screamed. Every phone in the diner buzzed simultaneously with the emergency alert tone. Beep, 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 beep. Panic. Pure, distilled panic. People knocked over chairs. Someone threw a coffee mug. Evan grabbed Sierra's hand. "We have to go. Now!" He looked at Garrick. "Run the story!" Evan yelled. Garrick grabbed his recorder. "I need to verify. Run it!" Evan dragged Sierra out of the booth. They pushed through the screaming crowd toward the door. They burst out onto the sidewalk and stopped. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, was Miles Ketter. He was wearing a casual jacket. He was smiling. He held a phone to his ear. "There they are," Miles said, not to Evan, but to the phone. He pointed at them. "That is them!" Miles shouted to the crowd spilling out of the diner. "That is the collaborators. They have one of them." The crowd turned. Fear is a powerful lens. It turns confusion into violence instantly. They saw Sierra's hood. They saw Evan running, and they saw the enemy. "Get them!" Someone yelled. "Run!" Evan screamed. They bolted down the alleyway next to the diner. Steps pounded behind them. A bottle smashed against the brick wall inches from Sierra's head. They sprinted past dumpsters and overflowing trash cans. Evan knew the town layout. He knew this alley led to the old lumber yard, which connected to the forest. They reached a chain-link fence. Evan laced his fingers. "Up!" Sierra stepped into his hands and vaulted the fence with impossible agility. She landed on the other side and reached through the mesh to grab his shirt. "Climb!" Evan scrambled up the fence. A hand grabbed his ankle. He kicked back hard, connecting with a jaw. He tumbled over the top, landing in the dirt. A gunshot cracked. Dirt kicked up near his face. Miles was at the end of the alley, holding a pistol. He aimed again. Suddenly, a tile from the roof of the building above Miles shattered. A dark shape dropped from the sky, landing on the hood of a car next to Miles. It was Vielle. She was pale, her arm in a sling, but she was moving on pure adrenaline. She hissed, a sound that was primal and terrifying, and through a piece of rebar she must have scavenged from the roof. It speared the windshield of the car Miles was standing next to, shattering it. Miles flinched, ducking for cover. "Vielle!" Sierra screamed. Vielle looked at them through the fence. She didn't smile. She just jerked her head toward the forest. "Go!" Then she turned and scrambled up a drain pipe, drawing the fire away from them. Evan and Sierra ran. They crossed the lumber yard and hit the tree line. The noise of the town faded, replaced by the heavy silence of the woods. But it wasn't silent. A low, vibrating hum filled the air. It was the same sound Evan had heard in the basement, but magnified 1,000 times. They reached the ridge overlooking the river. Evan stopped, gasping for air. Sierra froze beside him. "Look at the water," she whispered. The river was not flowing. The water was rising. It wasn't flooding the banks. It was lifting straight up into the air. A wall of liquid being pulled against gravity by invisible strings. Droplets hovered in suspension. The riverbed was being exposed, wet and black. The soundless pulse hit them. Evan felt his teeth vibrate. "They are using the gravity anchor," Sierra said, her voice hollow. "They are not trying to open the gate. They are trying to rip it out." The ground shook. A massive tremor rolled through the valley. Evan looked toward his house on the hill. The house was glowing. Light was blasting out of the basement windows. The reinforced shutters were rattling. "The portal," Evan said. "It is opening." Sierra grabbed his arm. Her grip was painful. "It is opening on its own," she said. She looked at Evan, and the realization in her eyes was more terrifying than the gunshots. "They found a way to bypass the biological key," she said. "They are using the gravity drive to force the geomagnetic seam open. They do not need us to open the door anymore." Evan stared at the rising water. "If they don't need you to open it, then we are just loose ends," Sierra finished. "We are obsolete, and obsolete witnesses get erased." Another tremor hit, knocking them to their knees. The water wall collapsed. crashing back into the riverbed with the force of a tsunami, surging toward the house. "We have to get to Nemi," Evan yelled. They scrambled up the hill as the water roared below them, the trap snapping shut on the valley. The water had receded from the valley floor, leaving behind a slick coating of black silt and the smell of disturbed earth. But the silence that followed the tremor was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a trap waiting to snap shut. Evan Hale stood in his kitchen, staring at a map of the local watershed he had taped to the table. His hands were shaking, just slightly, a tremor of adrenaline that hadn't faded since they scrambled up the hill away from the rising river. "We cannot stay here," Sierra said. She was pacing the length of the room, her movements sharp and agitated. The cosmetic film on her face was cracking, revealing the violet bioluminescence beneath like veins of lightning. "They know the house is the center. They will bring heavier equipment than drones next time." "We are not staying," Evan said, "and we are not running." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "We are attacking Nemi, who was sitting on the counter sharpening a kitchen knife with a whetstone she had found in the shed." Stopped. "Attacking?" she asked. "With what?" "We have a truck and a soldering iron. They have orbital lasers. We have the truth," Evan said. "And right now, that is the only weapon they are actually afraid of." He pointed to the map. He tapped a location 3 miles upriver, deep in the state forest. "The old hydro station," Evan said. "It is marked as abandoned on the county maps. But look at the power grid usage I pulled before they cut my internet. That station is drawing 3 megawatts of power. That is not a dead station. That is a facility." Vael, who was sitting in the corner nursing her bandaged shoulder, spoke up. Her voice was weak but steady. "It is a containment site," she said. Everyone looked at her. "I recognize the energy signature from the drone transmissions," Vael continued. "It matches the frequency used by the oversight guard back home. It is a frequency designed to suppress resonance, to keep us quiet." She looked at Syrah. "The collaborator is not just a human suit. Syrah, it is Lord Kalen." Syrah stopped pacing. The color drained from her face, leaving her ash gray. "Kalen?" she whispered. "The High Minister? He did not die in the coup," Vael said grimly. "He sold the flight paths to the regime. He traded his own people for a seat at the table. And now he is here, advising the compact on how to catch us." Evan saw the devastation on Syrah's face. It was one thing to be hunted by aliens. It was another to be sold by your own kin. "Then we make him regret it," Evan said. He outlined the plan. It was simple, dangerous, and relied entirely on their ability to move faster than the compact expected. Phase 1. Infiltrate the hydro station. If Vael is right, that is where they are holding the other refugees they have captured over the years. We get them out. Phase 2. We broadcast. I have the journalist, Garrick, on standby. He is monitoring a dead drop server. If we can get a live feed from inside that facility, if we can show the world the cages, the compact loses its shadow. They lose the ability to pretend this is a safety operation. Sierra looked at the map. She traced the river line with a trembling finger. "And then?" she asked. "Then we bring everyone here," Evan said. "To the river bend, I fix the stabilizer. We open the gate, and we send everyone home." He walked over to the workbench where the stabilizer sat. It was a chaotic mess of wires and alien alloy, but Evan had added a new component, a heavy brass plate with 2 hand scanners mounted on either side of the ignition switch. "I made a modification," Evan said. Sierra stepped closer, inspecting the device. "What is this?" "A safety lock," Evan said. "To activate the portal, it requires 2 distinct biometric signatures. One human. One of your people. Why? Sierra asked. Because power without agreement is a weapon, Evan said. He looked at her intensely. I am not going to be the human who opens the door for profit. And you are not going to be the leader who makes decisions alone. If this gate opens, it opens because we both agree it is time. It is a check and balance. Sierra stared at the brass plate. She ran her fingers over the scanner pads. 2 keys, she murmured. 2 hands, 1 choice. She looked up at him, and her eyes were filled with a complex, terrifying gratitude. You think like a builder, she said. I am trying to build something that lasts, Evan replied. An hour later, they were in the basement, gathering gear. The air was thick with the hum of the house and the unspoken weight of what was coming. Sierra found Evan checking the charge on the signal jammers. She stood behind him for a long moment before speaking. You are assuming we survived the infiltration, she said. I am assuming we have to, Evan said without turning around. Sierra walked around the bench to face him. She was wearing a dark tactical vest Vielle had stitched together from car seat covers and nylon straps. It should have looked ridiculous, but on her, it looked like armor. I am afraid. Evan, she said. She didn't say it like a victim. She said it like a confession of sin. I am afraid because when I look at you, I do not see a teammate. I see leverage. Evan put down the jammer. Explain. Love is a tactical error, Sierra said, her voice hard. If Miles puts a gun to your head, I will surrender. I know this. I will give him the codes, the gate, the refugees. I will give him everything to stop him from pulling the trigger. That makes me weak. That makes you a liability. Evan stepped into her space. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that they were breathing the same air. Then let it create a reason to fight smarter, he said. Sierra shook her head, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. You do not understand. I have spent 10 years being nothing but a weapon. I do not know how to be a person who loses things. You are not losing me, Evan said. And you are not a weapon. You are a woman who is trying to save her family. And I am the man who is going to make sure you have a house to come back to. He reached out and took her hand. He placed it on his chest, right over his heart. Feel that? He asked. She nodded, her palm pressing against the steady, heavy thud of his heartbeat. That is not a liability, Evan said. That is the engine. We fight harder because we have something to lose. Miles has nothing. He has a paycheck and a power trip. That is why he is going to lose. Sierra looked at him. The conflict in her eyes was a storm, but slowly, the panic receded, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. She gripped his shirt, pulling him an inch closer. Her breath hitched. If we get out of this, she whispered, I am going to hold you until you complain. I promise not to complain, Evan said. They stood there for a second, the world narrowing down to the point of contact between their bodies. It was a precipice. One move, and they would fall into a desperate, consuming embrace. But the clock was ticking. Sierra pulled back slowly. She smoothed the front of his shirt, her hands lingering. Trust, she said softly. Over hunger. Trust, Evan agreed. He turned back to the bench, his hands shaking worse than before, but his mind clear. Upstairs, Nemi was standing in front of a mirror, practicing her face. She was frowning, trying to look intimidating. You are a crusty spoon, she hissed at her reflection. She shook her head. No, too culinary. She tried again, narrowing her eyes. May your socks be eternally damp and your pillow warm on both sides. Evan walked into the room, followed by Sierra. He stopped. Nemi, what are you doing? I am practicing human curses, Nemi said seriously. If we meet the bad men, I want to insult them properly. But I only know words from the romance novel and the toaster instruction manual. Evan couldn't help it. He laughed. It was a jagged, rough sound, but it broke the tension in the room like a hammer. Nemi, Evan said, wiping his eyes. If you tell a mercenary you hope his pillow is warm, he is going to be very confused, and confusion is good. Stick with that. Nemi puffed out her chest. I will tell them they are crumb-filled toasters. Perfect, Evan said. Let's move. The hydro station was a concrete monolith built into the side of the gorge where the river narrowed. On the surface, it looked like a rusted relic of the mid-20th century. Chain-link fences, graffiti-covered walls, and dark windows. But underneath, the thermal scan's veil had run on Evan's tablet showed a different story. Heat vents were pumping exhaust into the river below the waterline. They approached from the eastern ridge, moving through the dense undergrowth. The sun had set, and the valley was a bowl of shadows. Vile stayed on the ridge. She had insisted, despite her injury. I cannot climb well, she had said, but I can shoot. I will cover your exit. Evan didn't like it, but they didn't have time to argue. He, Sierra, and Nemi descended the slope toward the service entrance. The door was secured by a magnetic keypad. Evan looked at it. It was a high-end commercial lock, the kind he used to specify for server rooms. Give me 30 seconds, he whispered. He pulled a multi-tool and a small decryption dongle from his pocket. He pried off the faceplate and clamped the dongle onto the leads. Nemi watched, mesmerized. You are a burglar, she whispered admiringly. I am an engineer with unauthorized access, Evan corrected. The lock beeped green. The latch clicked. They slipped inside. The air in the facility was cold and smelled of antiseptic and ozone. It did not smell like a power station. It smelled like a hospital. They moved down a long metal corridor, guided by Sierra's resonance sense. They are close, she whispered, clutching her chest. I can feel them. It is loud, so much fear. They reached a set of double doors labeled environmental monitoring, restricted. Evan pushed the doors open. The room beyond was a cavernous hall, built directly over the underground canal that fed the river. The rushing water below provided natural cooling for the banks of servers lining the walls. But in the center of the room, suspended over the dark water, were the cages. They weren't bars. They were cubes of shimmering hard light, generated by emitters on the floor and ceiling. Inside each cube was a figure. Evan counted 12. 12 alien refugees. Some were curled in fetal positions. Others were pacing. All of them looked thin, their bioluminescence dim and flickering. They were connected to tubes and wires. Machines were monitoring their pulses, their resonance, harvesting their data like sap from trees. Evan felt a rage so pure and white-hot it nearly blinded him. He remembered his old life. He remembered the boardrooms where men in suits discussed resource allocation and human assets. He had left that life because he hated the dehumanization of industry. But this wasn't just industry. This was slavery dressed up as science. Sierra let out a low, animal growl. The patterns on her skin flared bright violet, burning through the cosmetic film. Burn it, she hissed. We burn it all down. She raised her hand, the air around her fingers rippling with heat. She was going to overload the emitters. She was going to bring the roof down. Sierra! Evan grabbed her wrist. She spun on him, her eyes unrecognizable. They are draining them, she screamed. If you bring the roof down, you kill them too, Evan shouted, shaking her. Look at me. Sierra trembled, fighting the urge to destroy. We are not them, Evan said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. We do not destroy the building while people are inside. We get them out, then we burn it. Sierra stared at him. Slowly, the madness receded from her eyes. She nodded. The lock controls, she said, pointing to a console on a catwalk. Evan ran to the console. It was guarded by a single technician who was more interested in his phone than the monitors. Evan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the technician by the collar of his lab coat and slammed him against the wall. Open the cages, Evan said. The technician, a young man who looked like he was barely out of grad school, stared at Evan with wide, terrified eyes. I cannot. It requires a supervisor code. Evan pulled the flare gun from his belt and pressed the muzzle against the console. Then I am going to melt the motherboard, and the failsafe will probably drop the containment fields, or it might electrocute everyone. Do you want to roll those dice? The technician typed. His hands shook. Access granted. The hum of the light fields died. The shimmering walls vanished. 12 refugees stumbled out of their prisons. They looked confused, terrified. Sierra and Nemi rushed forward. Sierra spoke in their language, a rapid musical cadence of reassurance. Suddenly, a siren screamed. A red strobe light began to pulse. Containment breach. A computerized voice announced, "Facility lockdown initiated." "Great," Evan muttered. He turned to the technician. "Run." The technician didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the exit. Evan ran to the catwalk railing. "Sierra, we have to move." The refugees were huddled together. They were weak. "They cannot run fast." Sierra yelled. "They don't have to," Evan said. "We take the service tunnels to the river." Suddenly, the speakers crackled. A voice filled the room. Smooth, amused, and terrifyingly familiar. "Mr. Hale, I must say, I am impressed. Most homeowners just call the police. Miles Ketter." Evan looked up at the observation deck overlooking the hall. Miles was standing behind the glass, holding a microphone. "You have caused a significant amount of property damage, Evan," Miles said. "But I am a reasonable man. I offer a trade." Evan pulled out his phone. He hit record. "I am listening," Evan shouted. "Leave the specimen designated Sierra," Miles said. "Take the others. Take your little friend Nemi. Walk away. I will deposit $5 million into an offshore account in your name. You disappear. You live a long, happy life." Evan looked at Sierra. She was looking at him. She didn't speak. She was remembering her promise that she would surrender to save him. Evan looked back at the glass. "You think you can buy me?" Evan yelled. "You think because you put a price tag on people, everyone else does too?" "Everyone has a price." "Evan," Miles said. "Not today," Evan said. "And Miles, smile. You are on the live stream." He held up the phone. "I am broadcasting this audio to a server in D.C. Evan lied. Well, half lied. Garrick was listening, but the audio wasn't live yet. The threat, however, was real. Miles's smile faltered. "Kill them," Miles said to someone off-screen. The doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Armed men in tactical gear poured in. "Move!" Evan screamed. He vaulted over the railing, landing on the lower platform. He grabbed the stabilizer he had strapped to his back. Sierra and Nemi herded the refugees toward the service tunnel entrance. Evan brought up the rear, firing the flare gun down the hallway. The red phosphorus exploded in a blinding flash, buying them a few seconds of confusion. They sprinted into the tunnels. These were old maintenance tubes, dripping with slime and echoing with the sound of boots. "We need to get to the riverbank," Evan yelled. They ran for what felt like miles. The refugees were stumbling. Sira was practically carrying an elderly alien whose skin had gone gray. They burst out of the tunnel into the night air. They were at the river bend, a mile downstream from the house. Drones swarmed the sky. Searchlights swept the forest. "We are pinned," Nemi shouted. Up on the ridge, a single gunshot rang out. A drone spiraled out of the sky, trailing smoke. "Vael!" Sira cried, over the comms earpiece they had salvaged. Vael's voice crackled. "Go to the water. I will draw them off." "No!" Evan yelled into his mic. "Vael, get to the extraction point." "Too many of them," Vael said. Her voice was calm. "I am lighting up." On the ridge, a brilliant violet light flared. Vael had dropped her suppression cloak. She was burning her bioluminescence at maximum intensity. In the dark valley, she looked like a beacon. Every drone, every searchlight swiveled toward her. "She is acting as a decoy," Sira whispered. "She is suicide baiting them." "We have to go back for her," Evan said. He turned toward the slope. Sira grabbed him. "No," she screamed. She yanked him back. "If we go back, the gate does not open. If the gate does not open, these 12 people die." Vael made her choice. "Evan, do not dishonor it by letting it be for nothing." Evan looked at the ridge. He saw the tracers tearing up the earth around the violet light. He felt a tearing in his chest, a physical rip. He looked at Sira. She was crying, but she was standing firm. "Okay," he choked out. "Okay." They ran to the water's edge. Evan slammed the stabilizer onto a flat rock. He flipped the switches. The machine whined to life. "Get ready," he yelled. Sira turned to him. The refugees were wading into the water, huddled in fear. Sira grabbed Evan's face. The chaos of the battle faded for a second. "You are my home now," she said. It wasn't a romance novel line. It was a factual statement of geography. Her home was not a planet, it was him. Evan looked at her, at the dirt on her face and the fire in her eyes. "Then we protect it together," he said. He grabbed her hand. "Place your hand on the scanner," he said. Sira placed her palm on the left brass plate. Evan placed his on the right. The machine scanned them. Identity confirmed. Harmony established. Evan flipped the final switch. The river exploded with light. It wasn't like before. It wasn't a violent tear. The water simply ceased to be water. It became a sheet of midnight, a perfect rectangular void stretching across the river. Inside the void, stars burned, cold, distant, and familiar to everyone but Evan. "Go!" Sira shouted to the refugees. They ran. They splashed into the river and vanished into the void, passing from Earth to somewhere else. Nemi hesitated. She looked at Evan. "You are a good toaster," she said, hugging him fiercely around the waist. Then she jumped through. Sira and Evan stood alone on the bank. The stabilizer hummed. "Come with me," Sira said. Evan looked at the portal. Then he looked back at the valley. He looked at the town lights in the distance. "I can't," he said. "Sira, someone has to hold the door, and someone has to stay here and make sure Miles doesn't follow you." Sira looked at him. She knew he was right, and it broke her heart. "I will come back," she vowed. "I will be here," Evan said. Suddenly, a voice boomed across the valley. Not from the facility speakers, but from a loudspeaker mounted on a helicopter rising over the trees. "Residents of Oakhaven, this is a federal emergency." It was Miles. The man known as Evan Hale is a domestic extremist harboring hostile biological weapons. He has initiated a terror attack on the hydro station. He is armed and dangerous. Do not approach. Evan looked up. The helicopter's spotlight hit him. Behind him, on the road leading to the river, headlights appeared. Pickup trucks, SUVs, the townspeople. They had heard the alert. They had seen the deep fake. They were coming to defend their homes. They poured out of the vehicles, men and women Evan knew. The mechanic, Jim, Mrs. Gable's son. They carried hunting rifles and shotguns. They looked terrified and angry. They saw Evan standing by the strange, glowing machine. They saw the alien woman beside him. "Step away from the thing! Hail!" Jim shouted, raising his rifle. Evan looked at the crowd. He looked at Sira. "If they shoot," Sira said, raising her hands, "I will kill them." "No," Evan said. He stepped away from the machine. He stepped away from Sira. He walked toward the crowd, his hands empty and raised high. "Jim!" Evan shouted. "Put the gun down! It is a monster!" Jim yelled. "We saw the news! It attacked the police! It is a lie!" Evan roared. His voice carried over the sound of the river. He didn't stop walking. A laser sight from a police sniper on the ridge danced on his chest. "You know me," Evan shouted. "I bought the Miller place. I fixed your alternator. Jim, I pay my taxes. Am I a terrorist?" He stopped 10 feet from the barrels of the guns. "Look at her." Evan pointed at Sira. Sira stood by the portal, illuminated by its light. She lowered her hands. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a tired woman in a dirty sweatshirt. "Does she look like an army?" Evan asked. "Or does she look like someone who is running for her life?" He pulled his phone from his pocket. "You want the truth?" Evan asked. "Look at your phones." He hit send. Garrick had been busy. The file Evan had uploaded, the audio from the facility, the video of the cages, the flight logs from Sira's DNA, hit the local network. Phones buzzed in pockets. Jim lowered his rifle with one hand and pulled out his phone. He watched the video. He heard Miles's voice offering Evan money to sell people. He saw the cages. The mood in the crowd shifted. The anger turned to confusion, then to horror. It says here they were selling them. Mrs. Gable's son whispered. The helicopter hovered lower. Miles's voice cut through the air, desperate now. "Shoot him. He is broadcasting malware. It is a trick." Jim looked up at the helicopter. Then he looked at Evan. "He is lying, isn't he?" Jim asked. "Yeah," Evan said. "He is." Jim turned his rifle toward the sky. "Get the hell out of our valley!" Jim shouted. The crowd joined in, shouting at the helicopter. The moral minefield had been crossed. They chose the neighbor they knew over the voice in the sky. Evan turned back to Sira. He smiled. "See?" he said. Sira smiled back. She stepped toward the portal. Suddenly, the stabilizer shrieked. The hum turned into a grinding tear. The brass plate with the hand scanners sparked and melted. Evan spun around. The portal was fluctuating. The edges were collapsing, turning jagged and violent. "What is happening?" Sira screamed. Evan looked at the device. The control chip was smoking. Remote kill switch. Evan realized with horror. Miles didn't just have a loudspeaker. He had a back door into the frequency. "He is destabilizing the gate," Evan yelled. "If the gate collapsed now, while Sira was crossing, it would shear her in half. If it collapsed completely, the release of energy would be like a tactical nuke going off in the riverbed. It would flood the valley with lethal radiation." Evan looked at the stabilizer. There was a manual override, but it required holding the circuit closed with bare hands. "Go!" Evan shouted to Sira. "Jump! I cannot leave you with this," Sira yelled. "If you don't go, the explosion kills everyone," Evan shouted. "A go!" Sira looked at him one last time, a look of pure, agonizing love. Then she turned and leaped into the collapsing void. Evan threw himself onto the machine. He jammed his hands into the sparking wiring, grabbing the manual override leads. Pain, white and absolute, shot up his arms. He screamed, his voice lost in the roar of the dying portal. He held the circuit. He held the door open just long enough for Sira to clear the threshold. Then, the world went white. The blinding white light that had swallowed the riverbank did not bring silence. It brought a sound that tore at the eardrums, a high-pitched shriek of tearing reality. Evan Hale blinked the spots from his vision. He was lying in the mud, smoke curling from the charred remains of the portable stabilizer. The brass plate he had held onto was a puddle of molten slag. He pushed himself up, his arms screaming with phantom pain. He looked at the river. It was no longer a river. It was a catastrophe of physics. The water had stopped flowing downstream. Instead, it was twisting upward into a vertical cyclone, defying gravity. The liquid was breaking apart into bright, glowing filament lines, like unspooled fiber-optic cables whipping in a hurricane. The portal was not open, and it was not closed. It was fraying at the seams, leaking raw, discordant energy that made the teeth in Evan's skull vibrate. "Sira!" Evan shouted. She was 10 feet away, pulling herself out of the silt. She had not made it through. The explosion of the portable unit had thrown her back. She looked up, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with death and everything to do with failure. "The gate is collapsing," she screamed, her voice barely audible over the roar of the water. "If it fractures, it takes the valley with it." Evan scrambled to his feet. He looked at the device on the rock. It was dead, useless. "The control signal is still active," Evan yelled, pointing at the sky where the invisible frequency from Miles's backdoor hack was still hammering the geomagnetic seam. "We cannot stop it from here." Sira looked at the house on the hill. The windows were blown out, and light, blinding, violet light was pouring from the basement. "The anchor," Sira shouted. "The alloy in the basement. It is the root. If we override the system manually at the source, we can force a shutdown." She grabbed Evan's arm. Her grip was frantic. "I have to go," she said. "My body can interface with the alloy. I can absorb the surplus energy and ground it." "No!" Evan grabbed her shoulders, shaking her hard to break her panic. "You will burn out. That is gigawatts of displacement energy. Sira, it will turn you into ash. It is better than the valley dying," she retorted, trying to pull away. "I built the system," Evan roared. "I know the wiring. I can bypass the safety shunts." "You are human," Sira shouted back. "Your nervous system cannot handle the resonance. It will kill you before you even throw the switch." They stood there, surrounded by the screaming wind and the rising water, locked in a stalemate of sacrificial love. Neither was willing to let the other be the martyr. Evan looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the desperate need to protect him. Then he felt the same fire in his own chest. "Then we do not choose," Evan said. "We share it." Sira froze. "What?" "We link," Evan said. "You interface with the alloy to handle the resonance. I handle the mechanical override. We close the circuit together. Human ingenuity and alien biology." Sira stared at him. The fear in her eyes shifted into something else, awe, and a terrifying realization of what he was asking. "Evan," she said, her voice trembling. "If we link while the energy is this unstable, there are no barriers. I will be in your head. You will be in mine. You will see everything. The war, the blood, the things I have done to survive." "I do not care about your past," Evan said. "I care about your future." The ground heaved beneath them. A tree near the bank snapped like a matchstick, sucked into the gravity well of the river. Sira looked at the house, then back at him. She made her choice. "Together," she whispered. She stepped in close. She pressed her forehead against his. Her skin was burning hot, feverish with the energy she was already holding back. "Evan," she said, her breath hitching. "If we survive this, if the noise stops, will you still want me? When there is no danger to make the adrenaline sweet? When it is just quiet?" Evan gripped the back of her neck, his fingers tangled in her damp hair. "I want you when it is quiet most of all," he said. He pulled back, breathless. Run! They turned and sprinted toward the house. The journey up the hill was a nightmare run through a war zone. The ground rippled like water. Chunks of sod floated into the air. Above them, the sky tore open. Drones, confused by the gravitational anomalies, spun wildly, crashing into the pines. But a few remained stable, their red eyes locking onto the two figures running up the slope. Bullets chewed up the dirt at Evan's heels. "Keep moving!" Evan yelled. He shoved Sierra toward the porch stairs and spun around, firing the last round from his flare gun at a diving drone. The flare hit the rotor, sending the machine careening into the side of the house in a ball of fire. They burst through the front door. The house was screaming. The wood groaned under the pressure of the energy surge. Pictures had fallen from the walls. The air smelled of ozone and melting copper. They didn't stop. They ran for the basement door. The stairs were vibrating so hard Evan nearly lost his footing. The violet light from below was solid, a physical wall they had to push through. They reached the bottom. The basement room was unrecognizable. The silver alloy veins in the walls were writhing, pulsing with a blinding luminosity. The central pedestal was shaking, the metal groaning as if it were in pain. Evan ran to the breaker box on the far wall. He ripped the cover off, ignoring the sparks that showered his face. "I need to bridge the main input with the grounding loop," Evan yelled. He grabbed two thick cables, stripped of their insulation. Sierra stood in the center of the room, her hands raised, palms facing the alloy veins. "Ready!" she screamed. Evan grabbed the cables. "Now!" He jammed the copper ends together. At the same moment, Sierra slammed her hands onto the pedestal. The world did not go black. It went everywhere. Evan felt a jolt that stopped his heart. It wasn't pain. It was connection. Absolute, unfiltered connection. The house hum deepened into a voice, a vibration that spoke in images and sensations. Evan wasn't in the basement anymore. He was standing in a palace made of glass, watching a sun that was too blue set over a horizon of silver spires. He felt peace. Then, the feeling shattered. He felt fear. He was running through corridors of light, carrying a child who was crying. He felt the heat of plasma fire on his back. He felt the crushing guilt of leaving people behind. He saw Sierra, not the woman he knew, but a younger version, wearing armor, standing over a fallen comrade, her hands covered in blood that glowed. He felt her self-loathing. He felt the cold, hard armor she had built around her heart to survive. "I am a weapon." Her voice echoed in his mind. "I am broken." Evan pushed back. He poured his own mind into the link. He showed her the house. He showed her the first time he saw her in the river, not the shock, but the wonder. He showed her the soldering iron, the fixed radio, the quiet mornings on the porch. "You are not broken," he projected. "You are a builder." The sensation was overwhelming. Evan felt his knees buckle. The sheer volume of her memory, the weight of a century of war, threatened to crush his human consciousness. He started to drift, to black out. Then he felt a hand on his... In the physical world, Sierra had moved. She had left the pedestal and wrapped her hand over his where he held the cables. "Stay with me." "Evan," she whispered. Her voice was in his ear and in his mind at the same time. It was the voice of a lover and a commander. "Anchor yourself." She fed him strength, not alien energy, just sheer will. "Hold the line," she ordered softly. Evan gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was back in the basement. His hands were smoking. The cables were fusing together. The light in the walls began to recede, sucking back into the alloy veins. The screaming of the house faded to a low, rhythmic thrum. "It is stabilizing," Evan rasped. Suddenly, a crash from upstairs shook dust from the ceiling beams. Heavy boots on the floorboards. "They are here," Sierra whispered. She pulled her hand away, breaking the link. The loss of contact was a physical blow, leaving Evan cold and hollow. The basement door at the top of the stairs was kicked open. Miles Ketter stood there. He looked unraveled. His suit was torn, his hair wild. He held a tactical assault rifle and his eyes were manic. He walked down the stairs, the weapon leveled at Evan's chest. "You," Miles spat. "You ruin everything you touch. Hail." Evan stepped in front of Sierra. He was exhausted, his hands burned, his body trembling, but he didn't flinch. "It is over." "Miles," Evan said, "the broadcast is out. The town knows." Miles laughed. It was a wet, broken sound. "The town? Who cares about a few hillbillies with pickup trucks? I can spin the narrative. I can claim deepfakes. I can claim mass hysteria. But you?" He raised the rifle higher. "You are the loose end." He shifted his aim to Sierra. "And you," he sneered. "You are just property that got loose." Sierra stood tall. She didn't look like property. She looked like a queen who had just survived the end of the world. "I am not property," she said coolly. "I am the witness." Miles tightened his finger on the trigger. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the dark corner behind the stairs. A figure lunged from the gloom, and it was Vielle. She was bloodied, her arm useless in its sling, but she moved with the speed of a striking cobra. She didn't have a weapon. She held a heavy black Pelican case, the tech case Miles had been using to control the frequency. She swung the case with her good arm, using the momentum of her body. The heavy plastic smashed into Miles's forearms. The rifle discharged, sending a spray of bullets into the concrete floor. Miles howled, dropping the gun. Vielle didn't stop. She kicked the rifle across the room. Then she spun and hurled the tech case toward the open drainage grate in the corner of the floor, the direct line to the underground canal. The case hit the grate, shattered, and fell into the dark water below. Splash. Current disrupted. Vielle wheezed, leaning against the wall, clutching her shoulder. Miles stared at the grate. He stared at his empty hands. Then he looked at Evan. Evan was holding his phone. The screen was glowing. "Say cheese," Evan said. He wasn't just recording. The journalist, Garrick, had patched the feed through. Evan was streaming live to a server node that Garrick had promised linked directly to the UN Oversight Committee's emergency channel. "This is Miles Ketter," Evan said to the camera, his voice steady. "Agent of the Meridian Compact, attempting to execute civilians to cover up illegal extraterrestrial trafficking." Miles lunged at him. Evan didn't move. He didn't have to. Vielle tripped Miles. It was a simple schoolyard trip. Miles crashed face first onto the concrete. Before he could rise, Sierra was there. She placed a bare foot on the center of his back and pressed down. Her skin glowed with a threatening pulse of violet. "Stay down," she said, "or I will show you what a biological weapon actually does." Miles froze. Evan walked over. He kept the camera trained on Miles's face. "The police are coming." "Miles," Evan said. "Real police. Federal, international. And they are going to find the cages. They are going to find the logs in Sierra's blood. And they are going to find you, on the floor of my basement, attempting murder." Miles glared up at him, hate radiating from him like heat. "You think you won?" Miles hissed. "You just started a war." "No," Evan said. "We just ended your sale." 2 hours later, the silence finally came. But it was the loud silence of aftermath. Helicopters swarmed the valley, but they were not black assault craft. They were white, marked with the blue globe of international oversight. Armored vehicles rolled up the driveway, bypassing the confused local sheriff. Miles Ketter was led away in handcuffs. his head bowed, shielded from the flashing cameras of the press who had descended on the town like vultures. Evan sat on the back porch steps. A paramedic was bandaging his hands. Sierra sat next to him. She was wrapped in a thermal blanket, her glow dim but steady. Down at the river, a team of scientists in hazmat suits was setting up a perimeter around the water. The portal was stable. It was a calm, shimmering sheet of water again. The violent storm gone. A woman in a sharp suit approached the porch. She flashed a badge that carried enough authority to make the local cops nervous. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I am Director Joe, UN Treaty Compliance." Evan nodded. He was too tired to stand. "Is it secure?" he asked. Director Joe looked at the river. "We have secured the site. The compact's assets are being seized globally. The data you broadcast, it caused quite a stir. There are emergency summits being called in Geneva, London, and Tokyo as we speak." She looked at Sierra. "And the refugees?" Sierra asked. "Those we found in the tunnels are safe," Joe said. "They are being debriefed. They will be granted asylum status under the revised protocols." Sierra let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 10 years. Joe turned back to the river. "We have a decision to make about the gate," she said. "It is stable, but it is an open door. We can keep it open, establish a formal transit corridor, or we can seal it." She looked at Sierra. "As the ranking representative of your people on this site, I am asking for your recommendation." Sierra looked at the water. She looked at the stars reflecting in it. "If you keep it open," she said quietly, "someone else will try to own it. Another Miles, another compact." She looked at Evan. "Power without accountability is a weapon," she said, echoing the lesson they had learned in blood. "Seal it," Sierra said. Joe nodded. "I agree. But sealing a geomagnetic rift is permanent. If we close it, you are stranded here. You cannot go back." Sierra looked at Evan. She looked at the house with its blown-out windows and the birdhouses with the hidden cameras. She looked at Nemi, who was currently trying to explain the concept of a high five to a bewildered FBI agent in the yard. "I am not stranded," Sierra said. "I am home." Evan reached out and took her hand, his bandaged fingers laced with hers. "Seal it," Evan said. "But leave the lock." Joe raised an eyebrow. "The lock, the consent protocol," Evan said. "We keep the hardware. If the day comes when the world is ready, when there are laws that actually protect people instead of profits, we can open it again, but only if we both agree." Joe studied them. She saw the bond between them, the shared weight of what they had survived. "Very well," she said. "A two-key solution." She walked away to give the order. Evan and Sierra sat in the silence. "You gave up a lot," Evan said. "You could have gone back. You could have been a hero on your world." Sierra rested her head on his shoulder. "I was a hero there," she said. "It was exhausting. Here, I would like to just be Sierra." She looked at him. "And you gave up a miracle river," she said. "You could have sold tickets. I have a better view from here," Evan said. 6 months later, the valley had changed. The Lattice Meridian posters were gone, replaced by signs for the Oak Haven International Cultural Zone. The town was busy, buzzing with a strange mix of tourists, diplomats, and scientists. The house on the hill had been repaired. The shutters were just wood now, the steel plates removed. The birdhouses were occupied by actual birds. In the kitchen, Evan was making coffee. He set 2 mugs on the table. Sierra walked in. She was wearing jeans and a sweater. Her skin still held its faint luminosity, but she didn't hide it anymore. In Oakhaven, the neighbors had become a point of local pride. The town protected them with a fierceness that baffled the federal agents stationed at the perimeter. "Good morning," Sira said. She kissed him. It was easy, practiced, and filled with a warmth that grounded him. She sat down and picked up the local paper. Treaty reformation talks enter final phase. The headline read, "Former Compact Executive Miles Ketter denied bail. Justice moves slow," Sira noted. "But it moves," Evan said. A loud crash came from the bathroom. Evan flinched. Sira sighed. "Nemi," Evan called out. Nemi appeared in the doorway. She was soaking wet. Water was dripping from her nose. "The waterfall is a success," she announced, beaming. Evan looked at the puddle forming around her feet. "Nemi," Evan said patiently, "the shower head is not a waterfall, and you cannot remove the flow restrictor with pliers. It was too slow," Nemi argued. "A river does not drizzle. Evan, it rushes. I have liberated the plumbing." "I will get the mop," Sira said, hiding a smile behind her coffee mug. Evan shook his head, laughing. He looked at the chaos, the wet alien in his hallway, the political treatise on his table, the woman he loved smiling at him. He walked to the back door and stepped onto the porch. The river flowed below, clear and normal. The gate was closed, the water just water again. The valley was quiet, but it wasn't the lonely quiet he had bought the house for. It was a different kind of peace. He remembered what he had told himself when he first arrived, that he wanted a place where nothing would bother him. He had been wrong. A home isn't peaceful because nothing threatens it. The world would always have threats. There would always be greedy men and broken systems. Peace wasn't the absence of danger. Peace was the knowledge that when the danger came, you wouldn't face it alone. Peace was the people inside the walls who told the truth, honored boundaries, and defended each other. Evan took a sip of his coffee. He heard Sira laughing inside the house as Nemi explained why towels were inefficient drying tools. He smiled. He was exactly where he chose to be.